G'day, I'm Shane. This is my 1998 Honda Integra DC2 that I built into a race car. It's swapped with a K20 and a 6-speed gearbox from the later model DC5 Integra, and as you'd expect for a race car, literally everything else has changed. I think there's 6 parts left from the original car, and the body is one of those parts. I started this build in late 2022, and it took me just over a year, so I finished it at the end of 2023. And I've been competing in it and developing it right through 2024. I wanted to pull together a big long video covering the whole process. There's a lot involved in a race car build, heaps of things to think about, heaps of things to do. So it's a pretty long one, sorry. It's about 3.5 hours at this point. But if you're able to make it through until the end, I'll throw in a couple of my fastest laps from the last year of racing, talk through how the car's performed, what's broken, what's gone well, and what we plan to do over the next year or two with it. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the race car build for my DC2 Integra. It's been a fairly long time coming. I'd intended to start this a lot earlier in the year, but life gets in the way. I sold my previous race car, which was a Honda Civic, about 4 or 5 months ago now, and have been slowly collecting parts and getting ready to get stuck into this new Integra. So firstly, what sort of events am I going to build this car for? So like I just mentioned, circuit racing is definitely the focus, but I still want to keep up the tarmac rally sprints. They're amazing fun, and you get to go to a lot of different sort of areas and little street-based circuits to have a go on. So that means it needs to be slightly compromised between the two, but on the whole, the build is pretty well circuit focused, just with slightly different suspension set up to suit the more tarmac rally stuff, which is a bit bumpier. In terms of chassis preparation, I've picked up this 1998 Honda Integra DC2. It's a VTEC B18 C2. I grabbed this off a friend of mine, somebody I'd met through the Honda community, who was planning to build the car with his son, but both sort of ran out of motivation, unfortunately, and moved the car on to me. It had a bit of panel damage in the rear when I picked it up, which was why they were able to pick it up cheap in the first place, but that's all been fully repaired now. And once I sell the driveline out of this, it'll basically owe me nothing. And it's a very clean shell. It's done about 250,000 Ks, but super clean inside, super clean outside. No oil leaks, nothing. It's, for as far as an old Honda goes, it's pretty much brand new. So to get this ready for race car life, first thing we'll be stripping out all of the interior back to a complete bare shell, removing all the sound deadening, removing all the unneeded bracketry and anything else I can cut out of the car to save weight. Remove all the windows and the sunroof and get that sent off to get a full roll cage. This will be getting a national spec cage, so double door bars, FIA bars, everything you can think of to try and make it as safe as possible. Safety is number one, it always has been, and it's super important to make sure that's taken care of right from the start. For the driveline, I'm going with a K20-Z1 motor, which is from 2005-2006 Honda Integra DC5 Type S. These are some of the strongest K20s you can find without going to the full JDM Type R motor, about 210 horsepower stock. For the engine itself, it'll be kept pretty stock for now. In future I might go for a built bottom end, but at this stage it's just going to be a set of cams, springs and retainers up top, and a bit of a refresh all round, and good exhaust and good intake. So intake manifold, I've picked up a Skunk 2 Ultra Street manifold, and exhaust is just the standard old PLM V2 headers. Hoping for around 210, 220 horsepower at the wheels once it's all done, which will be 60, 70 horsepower more than what my previous Civic was putting out, and a boatload more torque, so really looking forward to that. In terms of gearbox, it's the standard Type S gearbox, but it's been completely rebuilt. It's essentially brand new. So I've got a V3 close ratio gear set from BYP over in Sydney. That has an aftermarket first and second gear, which are really tall, so like 2.6 first gear, 1.6 second gear, and then a mix and match of OEM ratios for third through sixth, which makes the spacing incredibly close. First gear will do about 90-95 kilometers an hour, and sixth gear will be about 250 kilometers an hour on the tyres that I'm running. While I was getting rebuilt, I've put an OS Giken 1.1 way limited slip diff. That's a clutch type LSD. They appear to be the best of the best. A lot of my friends have had really good luck running those. And that makes a massive difference over a standard type sort of helical LSD. You won't spin one of the tyres ever, it'll always maintain traction, and that's super handy for the tracks where you need to bang off the curbs to be fast, like the Collie track in Western Australia. That's very important for that. For suspension, essentially everything on the car will be brand new and upgraded. Starting with the coilovers, I've gone with Shockworks, which are a local Australian company, very highly regarded and custom built to your specification. They're just single adjustables, but it's a great way to get the car set up for now. And maybe down the track we'll go to something 2 or 3 way adjustable if it gets developed that far. Spring rates, these are running 20 kg front springs and 14 kg rears. That seems fairly high, but the Hondas seem to love a high spring rate, and especially the amount of grip I'll be running in the car, that's much needed. But yet I had sort of 16 kg springs on my EG Civic, and that was actually fairly soft for the amount of tyre I was running. So I'm looking forward to these, and from all accounts they work really, really well. For suspension arms, literally everything's being changed out for spherical bearings. There's no bushes left in the car at all apart from the sway bar bushes. So it'll, one, reduce a lot of binding and stiction in the suspension as it moves through its range of motion, but two, it stops any alignment changes at all under braking or acceleration or cornering. That's rock solid. Really looking forward to how tight and direct this is going to feel. Lower control arms, I've got the PCI billet aluminium front lower control arms and PCI spherical compliance bushing. For upper control arms, I've gone for the Hone Developments upper control arms. Most upper control arms for Honda chassis just use a little friction joint to adjust camber. These have a little sawtooth sort of adjustability in there. You can probably see it, the gold to the black. That locks the camber in place. That's not moving at all. Really looking forward to this because I've had pretty much all of my old upper control arms move and change camber alignment as you hit a curb or just do a few too many track days, and it moves itself out of alignment. Down the back, more PCI, so that's a PCI billet lower control arm there, and then also a PCI trailing arm bush. For the upper arms, the camber arm is an adjustable honed development piece that's got a ball joint on the inside and spherical on the outside, and that can also be shifted up and down where it meets the chassis to change the camber curve of the rear end. And for toe, I've gone for honed toe control arms here. In terms of reinforcement, I've got Hone Developments gussets for the rear trailing arms. That's really important when you start throwing a lot of tyre at these cars. They do tend to fatigue and crack the rear trailing arms. And I've also got a full roll centre correction kit from Honed as well. So on the rear has this little bracket here which bolts onto the lower control arm and spaces down the mounting point for the lower control arm. Changes the angle of that lower control arm when you're at your ride height, essentially the same as raising a car. So that corrects your roll centre and has it in a much better spot. That's important because when you lower cars a lot from their standard ride height, which you do for a race car, that throws the arm geometry way out of whack, and your roll centres get to a point where they're not very optimal for handling, because the manufacturers obviously set them up to be correct at their standard ride height, which is far too high for what we do. So this introduces a lot more roll stiffness into the car. It's the same effect as adding a much larger rear sway bar, but it does it without having to have a very large rear sway bar or high rear spring rates. So lets the suspension work, but you still get the right roll stiffness. And that's I did the same thing to my previous Civic, and that made a huge improvement. Up front, that's achieved by having extended ball joints. You can see the gold collar on the ball joint at the bottom of the knuckle there. That does the same thing as spaces down the lower control arm where it mounts. And also adjustable tie rods. So these tie rod ends here have spaces where they bolt on to the knuckle, and you can space them up or down to change the toe curve based on a number of settings you put into it. And yeah, same again, I had that set up on my EG Civic and it was really, really good. So looking forward to running it again on my Integra. For brakes, out back, I've got DC2 Type R calipers. I managed to find a couple of those brand or remanufactured over in America. And just your standard DBA sort of T2 rotors. Now they're about 30mm larger in diameter than the standard rotors. And you can also see they're 5-stud. So I've converted the whole car to 5-stud. It was currently 4-stud. And that makes finding the right wheels a lot easier, and also has bigger wheel bearings, which is important. On my previous Civic, I used to do a front left wheel bearing probably every 8 to 10 events, which is a lot. And that's because our local track is all right-hand turn, so it's very highly loaded on that left-hand side. So hoping that with these large bearings, they'll last a lot longer between service intervals. For pads out back, I'll be running a WinMax W3, which is sort of their mid-range, and that'll be complemented up front by a WinMax W6.5, which is their tarmac rally pad. They work great. They turn on straight away, and they're good right up to sort of 850 degrees, so very good for long track sessions. Up front, I don't actually have any brakes yet. That's something on my list to order, but I have converted the front to 5-star, as you can see. So that has Honda CR-V knuckles, which are incidentally exactly the same as a Honda Integra Type R. So, but a lot easier to find and a lot cheaper. For front brakes, I'll probably end up going with a 330mm Alcon 4-pot setup. That seems to be the most economical of the decent big brake kits around. Pad availability is everywhere, so that's all good. And there's a localish supplier over on the eastern states of Australia that keeps all those replacement rotors, rings, hardware in stock. So it's an easy way to go. Brake control, that's one that's very important as well. I love a very stiff pedal. I want to absolutely stand on it as hard as I can, and that makes it far easier to sort of modulate your pressure on the brake pedal when you're at the limit of grip and avoid yourself locking up. So to do that, we delete the brake booster entirely, and that involves a change in the pedal ratio as well. So you can re-drill the pivot point on the pedal. That's all achieved by Hone Development's boosted delete kit. You can see it bolted to the back of the master cylinder there, and that uses a 7/8 inch EK Civic master cylinder, so I just picked up a new one of them online as well. Electronics is something else that I also haven't purchased. That'll be left till right at the end of the build. One, because it's bloody expensive, and two, because I don't quite know what I want to run yet. Ideally, it'd be full Motec, so Motec ECU, Motec PDM, and Motec logging dash. But more than likely, budget will dictate something a little bit cheaper, either Haltech or Link. But either way, it'll be a full standalone ECU, using a PDM for managing all the power distribution throughout the vehicle. It's all solid state, replaces a fuse box, and is far easier to set up. And for data logging, I already have an AIM Solo 2 data logger, so whatever I end up with, I can probably integrate that into the system as well. That's been a huge help. We do the data logging for ourselves and a lot of our friends at the track, and we're all seeing massive gains by studying that data, find out where we can go faster, comparing amongst ourselves to see who does certain corners better, and taking those learnings and putting them in our own laps. We've seen results of 1 or 2 seconds knocked off people's PBs just through a bit of driver coaching and a bit of data analysis. So it's super powerful, and it's definitely something I want to continue doing with this car here. So that's a pretty basic overview of what the plan is. Now I just need to spend the next 6 or 12 months pulling this car to bits and putting it back together with all the new stuff. It's going to be a ton of work, a lot of learning involved along the way, which I'm really looking forward to. But motivation is pretty high. I haven't raced for probably 6 odd months now, and I'm starting to get the itch again. And it's also been great seeing my friends getting out and doing their racing and helping them, so that's really put me in the mood to get on with this. Long-term goals for the car, ideally, it's a pretty lofty goal, but the fastest under 2 litre outright vehicle in Western Australia would be the ultimate goal. That's currently a 102.4 at our local track, Wanneroo Raceway, which is held by a BMW Super Tourer from back in the 90s or early 2000s. There's a few Hondas that are pretty close to that now. A couple of the local race cars are sort of down near very low 103s or high 102s, and I don't see any reason that I can't be in that same ballpark. I think the transmission I've got in this, the power that I have in this, and the corner speeds that I know I'm going to get out of this, based on my experience with the Civic, will put me right there. Anyway, that's enough of the plan. Now I'm going to jump into stripping the interior, and after that, pull out the driveline, get all that stuff sold off, and get the shell prepped for roll cage. Alrighty, quick update. The interior is now completely stripped out. Still got all of the wiring left in the car. Don't want to chop the loom, so I'll need to remove the engine and thread all that wiring back through the engine bay and through the hole in the firewall before I can take that out. But yeah, everything else is gone. All the HVAC's out. All the interior wiring's pulled out of the way, fully stripped. Sunroof is gone. I've got a nice carbon fibre plug coming, well, here to replace that. And yeah, looking forward to how clean this is. It's going to be pretty nice to put back together. So next steps, start pulling out all the mechanicals. So drain all the fluids, get rid of the exhaust, start pulling the engine out and see how we go from there. Got a guy coming next week to pull all the glass out too. So side windows, rear windows, front windscreen. Need to do that for the cage anyway. But I'll be going to polycarbonate windows for the rear hatch, rear quarter windows and front doors. So yeah, getting all that glass removed, and that'll save me a big bunch of weight as well. Right, let's get into mechanical stripping. Okay, quick update on where we are. Engine's fully removed, engine bay's gutted, got all the power steering lines, everything else out of that. It's ready to go. Sold the engine pretty quick, which is handy. Gives me a bunch of money to chuck back into more parts. Interior is fully stripped as well. Nothing at all left. Gave it a good vacuum to get rid of all the crap that's built up under the carpet over the last however many years old this car is. 14 years old, 24 years old. Yeah, a fair bit stuck in there. So now that we're empty and clean, time to start the arduous job of sound deadening removal. I can't be bothered spending $100 on dry ice, so I'm just going to have a go with a gas torch and a scraper. It'll be miserable, but we've just got to get through it. It's the only there's no easy way to do this. Once I've scraped the bulk of it off, I've got a bunch of old petrol here from the tank that I drained out of the car. I'll start using that to clean up the residue and hopefully have a decent floor ready for cage left over. Cage is now booked in. That's heading to Not Scared Fabrication here in Perth about a month's time hopefully. So yeah, time to get onto it. Well, that wasn't too bad. Bit of a monotonous job. That probably took 2 or 3 hours to get everything out of there. Did an okay job. The stuff in the rear was definitely a lot easier to get out than the stuff in the front. But as you can see, it's left a ton of residue behind. So now to get in there with some petrol or adhesive remover and see if that'll clean up. In total, I pulled out quite a lot. I just weighed those buckets. It's about 10 kg, so not a heap when you're from an overall weight perspective, but every little thing counts. So pretty happy I did that. I just got to clean it up. Alrighty, quick update. So after much manual labour and much inhaling of strong solvents, we've got all the residue cleaned out from the sound denting. That was an absolute prick of a job. So I think I shot myself in the foot by using heat to remove the sound denting in the first place. It left a heap of residue. So I had to basically let the whole car soak in xylene. I recommend getting a little spray bottle and spraying it everywhere. The misting action works pretty well. And just, quite a few hours of scrubbing and scraping to get it all off. Once it's down to a thin layer, the xylene basically melts it off, so it does work really well. I just do recommend having a strong fan or doing it outside to make sure there's enough ventilation. So that's essentially it for sound denting and cage prep. What I'm going to do now is get on to removing some redundant brackets, stuff like the seat mount there, seat mounts up the sides, and all those little plastic clips that are, were holding wires or panels or anything like that around the interior. So I'll get into that now. And that's it. Rear seat brackets are out. It was a bit more of a pain than I imagined. The spot weld drill bits I bought off eBay weren't fantastic. A few holes to get filled in, that's all good. There's probably a few little other brackets I can get into, but maybe later when I've got some more energy. But yeah, that's the end of stripping and cage prep. We are ready to go. It's booked in for a cage probably the end of this month, which is November 2022. Hopefully gets in around then, get it back before Christmas, and start mechanical assembly. So there's heaps to do. Suspension, engine, fuel, the electronics, everything. The other week I just picked up the car from Roll Cage Fabrication and interior paint. Frankie from Not Scared Racing and Fabrication did this up in Perth. He did a fantastic job. It's turned out really nice. Interior colour, it's Honda Polished Grey Metallic. It's a pretty standard colour across a bunch of the late model Hondas. I thought that goes quite well with the black exterior. I didn't want to go for a white interior, it'd be a bit too bright. So yeah, really happy how this turned out. It's a full national spec cage, so it has all the extra bars required for that. It's also tied into the front strut towers, and the main benefit of how this is all done is it's super tight to the car and there's a heap of room to get in and out. So I'm a pretty lanky guy, I'm 6'1", and these are pretty small cars, so we've managed to get the seat really far back and really low by having the main hoop anchored up on the sort of the base of the rear seats rather than down in front of that sort of little drop down there. So that's given us heaps more room. That's worked out quite well. Seating position is really good. I'll probably just chuck the seat forwards or lean it forwards a tiny bit more just to get it, me sitting a little more upright, but I've got heaps of room around my helmet to the cage, including when we add the padding. On the side of the car here you can see some tubes that are welded into the sills. So these are for rally style pin stands. I've got 3 tubes on each side, one in the middle acting as a jack point, and that's lined up with the centre of gravity of the car. So that's more of just future proofing, so when the time comes to run some decent aero on the car, we have sort of deeper side skirts, front splitters, things that prevent access to the factory jack points. This will make life very easy. They basically just chuck a little pin or a rod inside these tubes and jack up from there, and then also stick your axle stands under there as well. Car's super clean now, so I'm going to have to be pretty careful not to scratch it all while I'm assembling the rest of it, but yeah, super happy how it turned out. Also picked up some wheels and tyres, had these powder coated, so these are just rotor grids. I can't afford T37s at the moment, which are a lot lighter, but in the future we'll go for that. Had them powder coated in a sort of candy apple red colour. Really pops in the sun. Very stoked with how these turned out. These are the rear wheels you're looking at now, so they've got 235 45-17 Advan AO50s on them, which is my tyre of choice. And they're on a 17x8 rim and a plus 44. They probably won't quite clear the rear trailing arm, so I'll chuck a 5mm spacer on. But that's quite a wide rear tyre to get in the back of one of these. So hopefully fits in the guards. For fronts, running a 17x9 plus 25. At this stage just got some old Kumo V70As, 255 40-17 just for testing, so we'll do a few, once the car's up and running, do a few test days on those, and then buy a new set of AO50s for the front as well. AO50s are pretty expensive, so I didn't want to sort of chew through a set of those just setting the car up initially. For the rest of this video, what I'm going to do is get the car back in the garage, get it up and pull all the suspension subframes out of it so I can get it on dollies. It can be sort of just moved around the garage a lot easier, and that also lets me start prepping suspension for final install. So the rear trailing arms need some gussets installed and the roll center correction kit installed on them, and front suspension, yeah, I'll get the subframe cleaned up, get some solid mounts on the steering rack and install the locking collars to better align the subframe to the car. I'll also probably just do a little tidy up, a few tidy up bits and pieces, like removing the engine mount, the B series engine mount out of the bay, ready for the K series mount to go in, and just start prepping for more mechanical installation. Alright, let's get into it.
You say you wanna cry, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose.
So it was pretty straightforward. Just moved all the front suspension, brake booster, ABS, brake lines, front subframe. Everything came out pretty easy. I got rid of the front guards too, because I'll start to clearance some of these seams up here for the bigger diameter wheels, so they don't cut my tyres when it gets pretty low. Car's starting to get super stripped now. Got everything laid out over here. Subframe is a breeze to take out, and then just got big bunch of stuff, all the suspension and brakes. I'll try and sell what I can, recoup a bit of money. because literally all of that is getting replaced. Next up, what I want to do is cut out this engine mount. This is for the B series. The K series motor is 180 degrees offset to the B series, so the front of the K series motor sits here, and that clashes with that mount. So the Hasport mount kit has a replacement, but we need to drill out the spot welds off this, remove that, grind it down a bit, and get that ready. So we'll do that now.
Let's have a bit of fun till our downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side.
Cool, that came out relatively easily. One of the spot welds wasn't accessible with a drill, so I just kind of had to brute force that off with a chisel and a pry bar once the others were free. But yeah, I've cleaned that up, got a couple other little brackets off just next to it, and chopped off some studs that were sticking out on the firewall as well to clean that up. So that's kind of where the exhaust runs. I won't be mounting too many things above the headers there. I'll go with silica primer. That'll be done for a little while, and then I've got to paint the engine bay at some point once I finish mocking everything up. But yeah, now I'll get on to rear suspension, I think.
My love, you say you wanna try, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason.
So that's all done. That too was pretty straightforward. So I've taken suspension in and out of these things a lot now. Yeah, that's all out. Still need to strip down the rear arms, get that ready for 5-stud conversion, weld in gusset plates, all that sort of stuff. So I'll get onto that sometime soon. In the meantime though, I think it's time to clean up. Got a heap of crap out of the car today, so organise that. Whatever I'm keeping, chuck away in some tubs. Whatever I'm selling, get that up. But yeah, that's about it for now. Good morning, it's a new day, I've got back into it. Today I just pulled everything off the rear trailing arms, disassembled the front subframe, got that all ready to go. Gave it all good degrease in a power wash. Hasn't turned up amazing. I'm in two minds as to whether I want to repaint these or not. We'll see how much energy I have for that, probably can't be bothered. And also gave the engine bay a bit of a clean as well. It's in pretty good nick anyway. There wasn't really any leaks or grease coming out of the original engine, so just kind of grit and dust and stuff in there, so I just gave that a bit of a soap up and a wash down. I'll let that dry out in the sun for a while. Next will be probably clearancing the wheel arches, so getting those seams out of the way ready for the tyres. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is these seams where the body panels are joined together, I want to fold all those flat. So these cars are only ever designed with 15-inch wheels, which, you know, with their tyres are sort of around 580-600mm in diameter. When we jump up to 17-inch wheels, which most of us do for track cars, that jumps you up to sort of like 640mm diameter tyre. So running the car at the same ride height means your tyre is 20mm closer to these seams. So on a few of my friends' cars, I've seen these cut under the tyres before at full bump. So what I'm going to do is just lightly heat them and give a bit of massage with the hammer, and get those nice and flat out of the way. pretty quick and easy. We can see down here it's all folded flat. It's just the seam sealer giving way. The seam itself hasn't actually broken. Got that flat up against the rest of the body, and same up the top. Roll that all over. So it's given me an extra probably 15 or 20 mil of room before the tyre contacts the body. Pretty good outcome for about 5 minutes work. Next up, I'll start mocking up the gussets on the rear trailing arms and also do some modifications to fit the honed roll centre correction brackets on those. Alright, so with the rear trailing arms, when you start running pretty big tyres, especially sticky tyres and going hard on the track, these can tend to fatigue and crack. So Hone Developments makes a gusset kit. So just some bits of laser cut steel with some dimple dies pressed into them. I'll get one of my friends to prep these up and stitch weld them on. And that'll close in the rear of the box in the rear of the arm, make it a lot stronger. There's also these little gussets down here. So this is where the rear lower control arm mounts. We also put more stress on this because the roll centre correction kit actually spaces this bracket further down, so it's increasing the leverage of that arm on the rest of the structure. So we have a small little gusset here which kind of clips in, gets knocked in with a hammer, and then stitch welded through there to reinforce that as well. Just down here you can see there's a captive nut that's welded onto the original bracket where the bolt for the rear lower control arm goes in from factory. With those honed roll centre correction brackets, they kind of slide on over this, so we need to chop that off. So I'll get the grinder out and get onto that now. It's a pretty tight spot, so it's not the easiest thing to get to. I'll try and do as much as I can with a cut-off wheel, and then probably just chisel the rest off and then tidy it up. You'll also see that the trailing arm bushes have been pressed out. I've got a PCI spherical trailing arm bush kit, so I'll mock that up and get the holes drilled for that as well before I send this off to get the brackets welded on, just while I've got easy access to the back of this. Cool, so that's turned out pretty good. Get the thing off. I did forget that I need to trim down this edge here because the washers on the inside were contacting that, so I'll check the instruction manual to confirm that. Bunch of sludge and stuff in here, just road grime. Had to get some of that out of the way, but it all fits pretty good. So the way this bolts on, essentially, once that's in place, you put a bolt through the normal hole, and then drill a hole up in here, which puts a secondary bolt in there, and that locks it in place. So yeah, I'll do that now. It's now ready to bolt up. I'll just repeat that for the other side. I won't bolt them in just yet. That's why I used some just mock-up nuts before, because the actual nuts are sort of cone lock deforming nuts. So yeah, I'll wait till everything's welded, everything's sort of been painted on this arm, and then install those brackets just before they go back in the car. Alrighty, that'll do it for today and for this episode. Got the trailing arms there with the gussets ready to go out. I'll find somebody to weld them up. Subframe's done, ready to go in. Car is all cleaned out. Got some primer on the exposed areas. Probably next time I'll mock up the engine mounts, start looking at that, how the engine's going to fit in the car. And then hopefully by then I'll have some stuff back and can start sort of rear suspension assembly at least, but we'll see what we can get done. Today, main focus is getting the engine in the bay for a bit of a test mock-up. So I've installed all the engine mounts, so we have some nice billet mounts from Hasport. So one adapts to the factory transmission mount on the subframe. This mount here bolts in where the original torque mount went, and that replaces the old B series mount that we removed last time. And the other mount just bolts straight into the factory mount on the transmission side. There's a few brackets on the engine as well, so that adapts up to the transmission mount. We've got a T-bracket there back to the one on the subframe. To do this, I'll be lifting the front of the car up with the engine crane and sliding the engine underneath it, and then lift the engine up into place. Sort of the safest way. I don't really like having 200 kg swinging around 1.5 meters in the air. To make the car a bit safer, I've taken it off the dolly at the back and put some jack stands under the new sill tubes. They're holding up pretty well. When I get it back down with the engine in it, I'll do the same on the front. I'm sure these furniture dollies will take the weight, but I'd prefer to have it on jack stands, a bit more stable. Once the engine's in, we'll just be test fitting accessories like surge tank, catch can, power steering pump, that sort of thing. Figure out if it all fits under the bonnet. Once that's done, we'll take it all back out again and get the engine bay ready for paint. But first up, let's get the engine crane set up and get the thing in the bay. Bit of a mission, but we're done. Actually wasn't too bad. The hard bit was seating this mount back in here. I just didn't really want to slide over the polyurethane spaces very well. It took a bit of force. I got there in the end. Not sure what I'll do next time. Potentially I'll leave this bracket attached to this mount and then just bolt this bracket up to the engine once these two are hung. These bolts were a complete pain in the arse. There's a sort of a gusset through here which really prevents access to get to the bottom of them. That was my bad for not noticing when I was putting the thing together originally, but same thing, I think I'll leave these two parts put together next time and just bolt it to the gearbox as I put the engine into the bay. This one's pretty straightforward, everything lined up pretty well, but yeah, that's in. So I've got the motor on the lowest setting at the moment. You can see it sits super low in the engine bay. If we get on the ground, the sump is fairly low. I might actually raise it up one before when I do the final install, because there's two positions on the mounts. They're designed for a K24, which has a taller block, or a K20. So if I run it on the highest setting, that'll give me the most ground clearance. But it just means the engine is a bit higher in the bay, which is not as great for centre of gravity. Yeah, pretty happy with that. So now I'll just get on to figuring out where other stuff goes in the engine bay. There is quite a lot of room around these things actually. So the intake manifold takes up most of the space through here. But where the exhaust manifold runs, it kind of goes straight down and below the steering rack there. So there's got a lot of area up here which is usable, and all the space through here which is usable. So that's likely where the components are going to go. You know, catch can probably somewhere around here, surge tank and the factory battery location. But we'll have to play around and see how we go. Alright, so it's been a productive couple of hours of mocking everything up in the engine bay. I've got most of the major components in there. Took a bit to figure out where some of it went, but I think I've got a pretty good layout. Starting over in the back corner, so where the battery tray is, that's a surge tank for the fuel surge tank, just a little 2-litre Raceworks unit, so that actually perfectly fits inside the stock battery tray width. So I just chopped off the other half of the battery tray and modified that to get it all in there nice and securely. That's a really good spot for it. It's really well protected. You can see there's actually a roll cage bar that runs through to the strut top there. So if I'm in an accident, that is probably the least likely place to crumple out of the car, and yeah, pretty happy with that. just next to those, I've got the fuel filter mounted up on the strut tower and the Flex Fuel E85 content sensor mounted down on the chassis rail. That's using existing bolt holes for at least one of the holes on each. That should be pretty nice line routing to get from the tank into those. The real pain in the ass was this catch can. It's friggin' huge. So for Motorsport Australia regulations, if your car is over 2 litre, you need at least a 3 litre catch can. The car is currently 2 litre, but in the future I may go larger engine or supercharge it. So I thought I'd better future-proof and do it right the first time. So I've got, a 3.5 litre catch can. It's about 350mm total height, so it's really difficult to fit anywhere. I explored sort of having it around this sort of area next to the catch can, but it just gets in the next to the surge tank, but it just gets in the way of everything. So this is the least worst option. It does fit pretty good where it is. It's a nice spot for it. Where it gets a little bit complex is it'll make running the air intake quite tight. So you can see the angle on the plenum here. The air intake is going to have to sort of come off, snake down, and then snake underneath it to get into the little area, inside the rear bumper in front of the front wheel, which is a nice spot to have it. It's gets a steady stream of cold air. It's not inside the engine bay, and it's pretty easy to protect from water as well. Should work though. The intake's the only thing I don't have mocked up because I'll need to fabricate it later. Also install the radiator. Weirdly, it doesn't have a way of mounting securing the top, so I've just taped it for now, but I'll figure something out for that. That all clears nicely. This tube here can sort of go straight past these filters and head into, I'll have a swirl pot mounted up here, so it'll be one hose pretty easy. And you can kind of see down here the factory thermostat opening. That just comes straight out of there and down into the bottom hose. It's a dual pass radiator. You can kind of see just down in here there's a divider welded in, so all the water coming into the top, it goes along, down, and then back, so it has to go across the radiator twice. Really efficient for cooling. And got the fuel rail on. I've got a radium fuel rail with a direct mount fuel pressure regulator on it. That's a nice, neat solution there. There's also a boss just underneath it here where I'll run a fuel pressure sensor if one will fit. Might have to do some jiggery pokery with lines to get that to work. But line routing out of all this should be pretty straightforward. Essentially, this is the factory fuel feed from the tank, so I'll have an in-tank lift pump. That'll come out of this, go straight into the surge tank. The fuel pump actually sits up here in the surge tank, so the outlet's sort of just here, so that can come straight out of here through the fuel filter, across, and then into the fuel rail. When it comes out of the fuel pressure regulator, this is the return side. That will shoot down into the ethanol content sensor, come out of that, go back up into the surge tank for the main return, and then when the surge tank's full, it needs to return to the main tank as well. So the third one of these will be coming across and just down into the factory return line, which is this one here. I'll get some AN fittings onto the end of those, just using little hardline adapters. Everything we run using braided AN line with aluminium fittings. So nice and neat, should all run pretty well. For brake lines, I've got a good idea of where I want everything to run. Essentially, as you can imagine, it's all just going to be across this back wall, but I just need to mount a bias valve, have a couple of T's to tie into the factory brake lines, and room for some pressure sensors. So heaps of space through there, I'm not too worried about it. I'll take care of that once everything's taken back out of the engine bay and it's all painted. So get that all ready once when we've got some space. That's about it for the mock-up side of things. Nothing much more that I need to do in that area. Next is to take it all back out again, get the engine bay prepared for paint, and sort of get that done. I also want to paint the wheel wells, so I'll probably get some just underbody coating, Raptor liner, that sort of thing, and just take care of those. There's some spots where the cage was welded in that are have burned through sort of the factory coating, so that's the main reason. But also just keeps it all nice and black. So I'll do that to the front at least, and potentially the rears as well. Apart from that, I've got a little bit more painting to do on some of the suspension. Just sort of some of the factory cast stuff needs a bit of a wire wheeling and a coat of black. So I'll probably take care of that pretty soon too. Welcome back. It's a new day. Pulled everything back out of the engine bay, got that ready for prep. So what I'll get onto now is giving it a good clean, a lot of road grime and stuff in places. Want to get that all off. Bit of a light sand, and yeah, get that ready for primer. I have never painted anything before properly, so I don't know what I'm doing, but it seems relatively straightforward to get at least a somewhat okay finish. I've just got some colour matched paint from a super cheap auto with the same colour as a car, which is like a metallic black. Yeah, so basically I'll just get into it and have a go, see how it turns out. If it turns out badly, then that's alright. It won't be worse than what the engine bay currently is with the standard paint, so either way we've got a win. Alright, I'll check you on time lapse and I'll get into preparation. Okay, that was a pain, but it didn't take too long. Just gave it all a light sand. I think it was 360 grit sandpaper, and then went over it again with a sort of a medium Scotch-Brite pad. The Scotch-Brite was great. That sort of conforms to the surfaces a lot better and gets in all the nooks and crannies. So all I was really trying to do is just scuff it up so that the primer adheres to it. So I've taken off all the shiny bits. That's now all pretty matte, scuffed up, ready to go. Gave it a wipe down with wax and grease remover and a little blow off with a little blower. Try and get rid of all the dust. Again, it's not going to be perfect. I know preparation is 90% of the final outcome, but I don't have the patience for this sort of stuff, and it's just a race car. As long as it looks semi-decent, I'll be happy. Also went around with the wire wheel and just tidied up where the roll cage was welded into the car, so there's some in each front strut tower. And also each rear strut tower, so I'll hit those with some rubberized underbody coating. But first, time to mask the car up, get that all ready. I'll do the underbody before I get into the main engine bay. But yeah, I'll mask up the car, cover up all the holes, get it all ready to go, and then kick into some painting. Okay, nice and quickly, just shot the wheel wells with some rubberized undercoating. Didn't go too hard on it. I don't want to add a lot of weight through this stuff, and it's pretty heavy sort of paint. What I really wanted to do was cover up those areas that have been affected by the cage welding, and kind of just blend it all in so it's all one similar colour. So once the guards are back on, the wheels in there, that'll all sort of be just a nice matte black, nice and neat. And same for the rear wheel wells. Not sure if there's enough light in there, but that's it's all matte black as well. That's it for today. I'll let that dry overnight, come back in the morning, and then finish up the masking for the bay and get some primer on that, so we'll get all that painted tomorrow. Okay, that went relatively smoothly. The wind was pushing around the spray quite a lot, so I ended up shutting the garage door and just rigging up a little light next to it. I'll probably have to do that for the rest of the coating as well. I had 2 cans in total. I kind of just covered it. There's some spots that aren't fully covered, but because the base colours are black anyway, I don't think it really matters. But overall, there's no sort of major runs or screw ups anywhere that I've noticed so far. So pretty happy with that. This is just drying for a little while, got to give it an hour or so. The instructions do say to sand it, just like a light sand with 800 grit, but I think I'll skip that because it is thin in a few spots. I don't need the world's smoothest finish in there, so I'll just carry on with the colour and the clear. I've got 3 cans of colour, so that should help me get a bit more coverage, try and get 3 to 5 coats on. So I'll start that soon. In the meantime, just rigged up some other parts. So I've got the front lower control arm, sort of the rear halves that go into the compliance bushing, and the little bracket, the modified battery tray that I made up to take the fuel surge tank. So it's got those in some epoxy sort of matte black. That stuff sprays on super well. Gives a really nice surface finish, no primer or anything, just lay it on thick and it's good to go. So I'll let those dry out while I start shooting the colour. Alright, back on time lapse. Well, that wasn't too bad. Had a slight emergency when the coverage from the cans was far less than expected. So about halfway through, I'd used basically 2 cans per coat. So I had to run down, get some more paint mixed up and bring it back. So that left a bit of a gap between coats, but I think we're okay. By the end of it, I was laying it on pretty thick. Not very good technique, but whatever. I think I've got most areas pretty well covered. And we'll let that set for an hour or so and then get some clear coat on it. When the paint came out wet and was laid on, you could really see the flake. It's sort of like a silver metallic flake, and then sort of like a purple and blue pearl in there as well. It's a pretty cool effect, so pretty keen to see what this looks like when the clear coat's all on and it's all dried up looking good. And we're done. I've let the clear coat dry for a few hours now. Had the garage door shut the whole time just to stop any dust blowing in. The garage itself is a giant mess, so it'll be a bit of a clean up tomorrow, but that's all good. It turned out pretty good. The clear coat sort of isn't super thick in a lot of places. I had 2 cans of that, which was good for I had 3 cans of that, which was good for a coat per can. There's only sort of a couple of spots, sort of like this, where it's on, proper nice and thick and lush. I don't know if you can sort of see any of the metallic coming through. I'll chuck some light on there, hopefully that'll help. But that's a pretty cool colour. The sun's gone away, so we'll have to wait and see what that looks like outside. But yeah, on the whole, pretty happy with everything. The main surfaces that you see when you look into the engine bay are pretty well covered. Yeah, that will definitely do the job as a race car engine bay. Not something I'm keen to repeat again in future. The clear coat in particular was pretty potent. I had a bit of a headache after that. But yeah, so I'll let this dry overnight, and then tomorrow probably start getting some suspension, start reassembling some suspension and get that in the car. That's it. Today's focus is suspension. So essentially the main shell prep is completely finished now. It's time to start assembling everything. So this morning I'll be starting off with rear suspension. Got that all laid out. So rear trailing arms, they've been painted. I've installed the PCI spherical rear trailing arm bushes through there. Got the honed roll center correction brackets down the bottom, and we've also got the honed strengthening gussets welded in. Everything else that's laid out is just all the arms and the suspension itself. PCI spherical lower control arms for the rear, honed spherical toe control arms with eccentric adjusters, honed adjustable camber arms for the rear, and these are set up to sort of work with their roll center corrected geometry, so they have these little spaces that correct or that change where this bolts in the car, so it can shift the mounting point up or down, and that changes the camber curve. Also, these come with shims, so they come with 2 shims per side. I'll install 1 per side. That lets me subtract either 1 shim or add 1 shim at the track for quick and easy camber adjustment. So they're like they're half a degree per shim, so it's pretty easy to work out what's going on with it. For rear coilovers, we have Shockworks single adjustable coilovers custom spec for the car. So I've taken the spring out of this one here because we'll do mock-up in the car and check tyre clearance and everything with no spring, so we can get the full range of travel and make sure the tyre doesn't hit the body at any place. Else we'll do that a bit later on. But yeah, everything's all set up ready to go, so I'll start installing pretty soon. Alright, so suspension's all in on both sides. I had to go up filming it, but I just look like a Gumby rolling around on the floor struggling to get bolts in, so no point seeing it. It all did go pretty smoothly. I'll try and get under here so we can see. The toe arms are a complete pain to get in. There's like behind that bolt just there, there's like a sliding nut inside the chassis, and it's pretty difficult to get it aligned, but got there in the end. So yeah, toe arms connect up the front. They have fine adjustment on the eccentric and then rough adjustment in the middle with the sawtooth, the 2 halves. Spherical trailing arm bushings straight up into the body. And then the PCI rear lower arms as well. So everything went in, yeah, nice and smooth, like I said. So shock has no spring on it now. This whole system should move up and down relatively easily. Well, it would if the suspension would move. Without the suspension in there, that'll just cycle up and down with, you know, like 1 finger's worth of lift. It's actually really good. So like you compare that to trying to use rubber bushings, they kind of stick, especially when they're up tight. So spherical bearings have way more free play because they're, you know, not sort of crushed on the sides, holding the centre in place like a rubber bushing is. But also they're, yeah, rock solid. There's no compliance in there at all. Pretty good setup. What I'll do now is chuck on the rear bearing and hub assembly and then the brake disc, get the wheels on, and then we'll start cycling. You'll do sort of a bit of a mock-up alignment, get it relatively in the ballpark, and then just do a bit of cycling to see sort of how close everything gets and whether I can fit these big rear tyres in the back of the car. Alright, so I've got the rear brake disc on and the wheel. First of all, the wheels look amazing, pretty stoked with how that's turned out. Really cool colour. Needed to use a 5mm spacer to clear the inside of the trailing arm. Without that spacer, it's a plus 44 offset wheel, which is quite a high offset. Without that spacer, the tyre was just rubbing the trailing arm. Now we've got about 5mm gap, so looking good. So what I've done is using a jack under the lower control arm, raise this up to my intended ride height. For this car, I want to run 310mm between the centre of hub and the lip of the guard to make it sort of more accurate for measuring. I actually measure from the bottom of the wheel down here up, and then just add on obviously half the diameter of the wheel. So the value I'm looking for is 546mm in this case. That's where the wheel's sitting at the moment. I've already had to do some clearancing up in here where the bumper like sort of attachment point was, so I've chopped all that off and then drilled a hole further back to put a cable tie in. I've also checked the camber to make sure I was relatively within range, and that was sitting about 1.8 degrees negative camber, so fairly conservative for what I end up running, but it's a good start for checking tyre clearance, because if we ever do need to lean the tyre up a bit more, I'll probably run somewhere around 2.5 normally. Then I know I've got the room to do that. So now what I need to do is firstly check droop. So I want to make sure I've got the droop that I'm looking for. I currently have the coilover set to the maximum amount of travel as possible, so the bottom mount on the coilover is wound as far off as I can get it while still having the correct thread engagement at the bottom. This gives me the most amount of droop. These are set up with quite short shock canisters, so I think I'll be quite limited for droop, but that's alright. So yeah, I'll put you on a tripod and we'll measure that up. Right, so the first measurement I'm checking is the ride height of the wheel. It should be set pretty much bang on where I need it. So that's 546 millimeters. That's exactly what I want for the ride height. That results in 310 millimeters from the center of the hub up to the lip of the guard. Now what I'm going to do is let the jack completely down so the wheel is at the bottom of its travel. You can hear that bottomed out. So now we remeasure and we write down the difference. So it was 546 millimeters before, it's now 570 millimeters. So subtracting those two numbers gives you 25 millimeters of droop. That's not much at all, but the manufacturer of the suspension, that's what they recommend for a circuit setup. They do recommend more droop for a tarmac rally setup, so I'm kind of going for like a mix between tarmac rally and circuit, but because of the honed roll center correction brackets, that spaces the lower control arm down more. That limits the amount of droop I can get out of the setup without going to a longer shock. So 25 mil is good enough for now. We've got plenty of rear tyre, it's a 235. So the inside wheel will likely lift off the ground, which you will commonly see on a lot of track Hondas. But yeah, we'll do some testing, and if that's not enough droop and I'm not getting enough rear grip, then I can always add some shock length into it to give me a little bit more droop. So that's it, 25 millimeters of droop. Now we want to calculate what the compression is. So I'll lift it back up to ride height, remeasure it again, and then we'll start pushing with the jack, pushing the wheel up into the wheel arch. One, to see if it hits anything and fouls. There's some bits inside here which I think will get in the way. But two, to see how high we can get it and calculate what our compression number is. So ideally the ratio of droop to compression is somewhere around like 1 droop to 2 compression. But because I've got such limited droop in this setup, it'll likely be like considerably higher number of compression. That's all right, lots of travel is all good. But yeah, we'll see how we go. Yep, still about bang on for ride height. Wheel doesn't touch anything, rolls really nicely. Let's jack it up and see what we get to. So it's currently not touching anything. And we've gone up about 30 millimeters, so there should be heaps more in it. But what am I going to hit? I think I'm going to touch on the bumper here. It looks like there's a good amount of room up front. And there's a bit of metal on the inside of the bumper too, which I think I'll hit. Yeah, so I'm just touching where I clearanced the rear bumper mount before. There's not really much further room for me to be able to do that, so what I'm going to do is add some camber and then we'll try again. Okay, so I've added about 1/2 degree or 0.7 of a degree of negative camber. We've also used a bit of a hammer and hammered in some of the more sharper spots here. So hopefully it gives us a bit more clearance. We'll check this up again and see how much higher we can go with the travel. Firstly, I'll just double check we were sitting with camber at normal ride height. Oops, that's a little bit too low. Yeah, fair enough. Cool, so that's right on -2.5 degrees of camber, which is about where I'm going to run. Toe still looks good at this point. Strap the car up and see where that ends up. So it's still got full rotation. We're getting towards the end of the suspension stroke. Now you can see I'm actually lifting the car off the jack stands entirely, so that's obviously bound up on something. From what I can see in there, I'm not at the top of the suspension stroke just by a little bit. Does that help? The sway bar is not connected, so that won't be it. I believe I've actually hit the wheel arch. See, the tyre no longer moves. Yeah, so I think I'm touching the top of the wheel arch up in here. It's at about 492 millimeters, so right height was 546. That gives us 52 millimeters of travel. Not a hell of a lot of travel. The bump droop ratio is actually pretty spot on though, so around 25 millimeters of droop and about 50 millimeters of bump at the wheel. So it's probably about the best we're going to get out of this. But I am a little bit worried about those because the tyre can hit the wheel arch before the suspension sort of bottoms itself out on the bump stop. I want to add some bump stop packers in there so that the suspension gauges the bump stops before the tyre hits the guard. If I'm in a corner going full speed, what I don't want to happen is the tyre contact the car, because that can slow it down quite rapidly, lock it up, but also damage the tyre. I'd much rather it came to the end of its travel on the suspension itself. So that's all good, easy fix. A few bump stop packers will seem right. Well, with that extra camber, there's plenty of clearance for the tyre in there, so pretty happy with how that turned out. And about sourcing for the rear, what I'll do is basically copy this across to the other side, so take the length of the shock where I've set it up, transfer that across to the other side, and that'll be the rear sorted. Actually, before I move on, I do want to show this without the wheel attached, so you can see where the jack is acting on the lower control arm. So what I'm doing is jacking this up sort of emulates the suspension travel with no spring to get in the way. So as we move up, you can see the suspension compressing, and that's about where we got to with the wheel. This bump stop acts as a bit of a telltale. You can see there's a little bit of a gap between the top of the travel. The bump stop itself will compress as well, so there's probably another 10 to 15 millimeters of travel at the shock. But as I said, I'm hitting the inside of the wheel arch with the tyre because it's quite a large tyre. This bottom mount here is wound off as far as it can go. There's a little telltale in there which shows you thread engagement of the shock body into the bottom mount. So that's as far down as it can go. Normally in this situation, what I would do is, because we haven't topped out the shock, I would unwind the bottom further, which lengthens the entire assembly. Then that means that this will hit the top sooner because it's longer. You're starting from the same point at the bottom. The top is higher, therefore the top will hit into the bump stop earlier in the travel. That would be the right way to fix it, because that would then prevent your tyre contacting the body. But like I said, I can't unwind the bottom mount any further without lengthening the shock body or getting some custom shock bodies in there. So where we're at now is I'll put some pack is in here to make the bump stop longer effectively, and that way the suspension will contact the bump stops before the tyre hits the body. So yeah, don't know if that made any sense at all, but that's essentially what I'm doing to set the travel of the shocks. I have no spring, I don't care about ride heights, all I care about is the top and bottom extents of the travel, and that's what this bottom mount controls. This does not control ride height at all. When we do get the springs back in the car, setting the spring perch up or down, that'll control the ride height, and that'll let us get to that 310mm between centre of hub and lip of guard that we were talking about earlier. That's really about it for how to set up the shock travel. Your number one sort of concern is making sure that stuff doesn't hit the body, and then you're adjusting the shock travel, adjusting the bottom mount up or down to move the shocks travel so that you don't hit the body. Fortuitously, this suspension is well set up from the manufacturer, which makes sense because they're custom made and the guys know what they're doing at Shockworks, so that the travel is pretty well set for where it's supposed to be. But yeah, quite a small amount of travel compared to what I'm used to, but that's a circuit car and that's what they need. Alrighty, moving on to the front pretty soon. Alright, so it's a couple of hours later. Before I moved on to the front suspension, I just got all the brakes sorted and everything squared away. Brakes ended up being a massive pain in the arse. Not really sure why, just the handbrake didn't seem to want to adjust properly, so it was a lot of on and off of the calipers to get that to work. And to get the handbrake brackets to work, you've got to adapt them to these calipers. They're from a Type R Integra, but got there in the end. That's all squared away and good to go. And I've now laid out all the front suspension ready to go in as well. So everything that's factory has been given a coat of epoxy black, make it look all nice and neat. Front uprights, I did these quite a while ago, so they've got new bearings, new drive hubs, honed extended front ball joints, which are for their roll center correction. 4 arms. Lower control arms are PCI, so they're like sort of billet aluminium. They have a little bit of extra caster in them as well. They match up with the stock sort of back half. Got PCI spherical compliance bushes. Got hone developments upper control arms, the camber arms. These give you a bit more caster as well, and they have a sawtooth design, so you can see the 2 pieces there slide back and forth on sort of teeth. That way, once they're bolted in, they're locked in place. That's not going to move. A common problem with the standard style of friction joint in the upper control arms, like your hard race, etc., under extreme cornering and curbs, that can tend to shift around a bit. I've had quite a lot of alignment change from that. These are some hard race spherical bearings as well, so they'll go in the back of the upper control arms and bolt into the chassis. Suspension, Shockworks, same as the rear. I've taken the spring out of one of them, so I'll set droop and compression travel with that and check all the tyre clearance. I have the guards off the car at the moment, so we'll check tyre to chassis clearance first, get that all set, then we'll mock up a guard and figure out just how much we're going to have to space that out to fit the gigantic front tyres. Okay, so front suspension's all in, that went nice and smoothly. You'll notice I've got some washers on the drive hub. I don't have my front brakes yet, they're on back order, so I'm just simulating the thickness of the front brake disc, or the front brake rotor hat, where it slips over the studs, so that the wheel, once we put that on and check clearances, is in the correct position offset wise. So now the suspension's in, don't have the spring in it, so I can cycle it up and down pretty easy. I'll check tyre clearances to the chassis itself, and then set the bottom mount on the shock so that we engage the bump stop before the tyre hits the top of the wheel well there. So we'll do that now. Alrighty, so I've just played around with putting on the front guards and the front bumper. In the stock position, the guards, the wheels don't fit in there whatsoever. They sort of stick out about 20mm. What makes this difficult is my intended ride height. Due to how big the tyres are, my intended ride height is pretty much tucking tyre straight away anyway. So what I've done to combat that is space out the guards. So it's built up a little space so that pops into the bottom there. That's just a mock-up one. I'll do a proper one out of aluminium later. And I've also lifted the bottom of the guard up, which then bows out the top. So that's made this fit pretty well by the looks of it. You can see there everything's looking pretty nice. I've got the camber set now to about the maximum camber that the upper control arms can give me, which is about negative 3.5 degrees. That's about what I'm looking to run anyway, but I'm going to need to make it all fit. So now what I'll do is chuck it back on the tripod and start checking wheel clearances again. I had a quick look under there and it's a worryingly small amount of compression travel at the moment, so we'll see what we can get out of it. Maybe we need to clearance it a bit or raise the ride height a bit. So straight away that's come up to full bump. We do have clearance to the guards. But from what I can tell, that's 20 millimeters total of bump travel, which is not acceptable at all. Don't quite know what I'm going to do about that actually. Probably the only way to get around it is to increase the ride height. That means I'm starting from a lower start point. I can go up further, so that would give me probably 40 millimeters of compression travel. Still not fantastic, but you can only work what we deal with. This is what happens when you run such massive tyres on the car. The bump stop is uncompressed as well. That can probably compress to another 10-ish millimeters of compression travel. But yeah, I think what I'll do now is change the ride height. Alright, so I've had another play around. I've added in the additional lock limiting spaces to further reduce the steering lock. I recentered the rack to make sure that the steering rack had the same amount of travel in both directions, and I've lowered the ride height a little bit. So now I'm at full compression. Got heaps of clearance when the wheel's straight. At full lock, turning right, that's just rubbing on the inside. And at full lock in the other direction, it's also just rubbing on the inside of the chassis rail. I'm pretty happy with how that sits. I would like a lot more vertical travel, but I just can't achieve that. I might be able to go like up a tiny bit further, but again, it just limits what you can do under high steering load. Guard clearance is all good. All I need to do is adjust how that attaches at the bottom to change how the guard bows out. I think it gives me all the clearance that I need. So that's pretty well it in terms of the measurements. So that's 530 millimeters. I've dropped down the jack. That's 630 millimeters. So that's 100 mil of travel, and approximately 35 to 40 of that is compression and the rest is droop. So not fantastic, but we're very limited by the tyre size we're running. When I do swap over to the Advan A50s on the front, which is what I have on the rear, these Coilovers are just here for testing. These have a really angular, fat sidewall on them, whereas the Advans kind of roll over a lot more. So I'll have more room with the Advans, and I think I can get away with a bit more compression travel on that. But we'll wait till we have those tyres to actually do the testing and figure out what we can get out of it. So that's pretty much it for the front suspension. What I'm going to do now is reinstall the spring for this, copy everything across to the other side, and then get it down on the ground so we can have a look at what it looks like. And there it is on the ground. Played around with the left-hand side, got that all matched up to the right, set the ride heights for the front and rear suspension, and we're back on the ground. I made up some different guard spaces to get the bow of the front guards working a little bit better. It's given me quite a lot of clearance now. Mind you, I don't have the brake rotors on, so the wheels will stick out another 5 or so mil, but that's pretty much perfect as it sits. Really stoked with how this is sitting. It looks awesome. Very, very happy. Can't wait to see it all done. Hopefully the colour of the wheels is popping in the sun there. It's yeah, really bright, really deep in real life. Very, very happy with how this has all turned out. I think the colours all go really well together. Glad I went for the grey interior rather than a white or a darker colour. It pops off quite good. And the engine bay looks pretty sweet in the sun as well. Can really see the flake and the colours coming through. So it's been a little while since the last video. I'll just catch you up on what I've been doing. Just chipping away at a few smaller jobs over the weekends when I've had spare time. This will be quite a short one, and then today's task is get the engine in the bay. So we'll start off with the rear suspension. When I set these up, I managed to get about 25mm of droop from the rear, and that's because underneath you can see we've got the honed roll center correction kit that spaces down the lower control arm, and which also spaces down the shock mount and reduces the amount of droop you can get out of the coilover. So Shockworks, they're complete legends. They rebuilt the rear dampers into longer shock bodies, so the threaded part of the shock body is longer. That allows you to wind the bottom mount off further and extend the amount of droop that it has. So because, well, I mean, 25mm of droop, that'd be fine for a dedicated circuit car. For me, because it's going to be a mix between tarmac rally sprints and circuit, I wanted a little bit more, and we've been able to achieve that. So it's a really good result, and rear suspension and front suspension is now all completely dialed and good to go. Also sorted out the braking system. So starting with the master, we have a honed brake booster delete kit, so completely manual brakes. You re-drill the pedal to increase the ratio and fit a smaller master cylinder. This is an EK 7/8 inch master cylinder. Here in Australia, it's difficult to get reasonably priced new or remanufactured masters, so typically I just buy stuff from Rock Auto in the States. It's super cheap, but it means it's set up for a left-hand drive car. You can see the circuit comes out on the wrong side. Doesn't worry me because I was going to redo all the hard lines anyway. Just means you've got to run a few extra lines if you're cutting it into a stock system. The reason I've rerouted all these lines is because in the stock car you have two circuits on the master cylinder. They're split diagonally, so on one circuit you have the left rear wheel and the right front wheel, and on the other circuit vice versa. And that's so that if one circuit is compromised, then you've still got one wheel on each end of the car that's acting to slow you down. In a motorsport application, that's not ideal. I want them split into front and rear circuits, which is what I've now done. So front circuit comes off, shoots into a uni, and then got new lines out to the front wheels. And the rear circuit, that shoots off into a bias adjuster valve. So I've got a Willwood bias adjuster valve, which I can dial in the exact brake balance that I need out of it. And that joins into the stock hard lines, which then head back under the car alongside the fuel lines. So I've got some nice unions there. These are from GK, these 4-way stainless steel unions. That's super handy because it allows me to mount the brake pressure sensors. I have two Bosch, I think they're 3000 PSI brake pressure sensors. They'll be very valuable, mainly for the front circuit, is understanding exactly how much pressure I'm applying and how I'm applying it. That's quite a good area for development, is understanding your braking technique and how you get on the brakes, what happens when you heel toe, that sort of thing. And then for the rear circuit, that allows us to exactly see what the balance is. So looking forward to getting that data. Pretty happy with how that turned out. The hard lines are all pretty nice and neat and shiny, so I'm always happy with that. I ended up with a Honda S2000 clutch master cylinder, which is this here. In the stock setup, they have a separate reservoir, so like a EG Civic or a DC Integra, the reservoir actually sits up here and has a line which runs to the master. So having the S2000 master just cleans things up a little bit. It has a very simple little billet spacer behind it to get it sticking out far enough. But yeah, it's a much neater solution. My front brakes finally showed up, so I ordered these in October 2022, and it's now May 2023. So really glad to get them. So I've got an Alcon 4-pot kit, 330mm by 28mm rotors. So they need 17-inch wheels to clear, and it's a pretty nice kit. So they're 2-piece rotors. So you have the steel rotor ring and then an aluminium rotor hat. These are fully floating, so they're not bolted directly together. Aluminium and steel have different rates of expansion as they get hotter, so quite significantly different rates of expansion. So if they were bolted directly together, there'll be a lot of stress generated in that because the aluminium expands much faster than the steel does. So we have these sort of like bobbin sliders, so they're sort of bolted through into the brake rotor, and they allow everything to expand at their different rates. And yeah, happy days. So that's what happens on the full race cars as well. The kit was fairly expensive, but it was I guess the cheapest of the big name kits, and it didn't fit amazingly. The dog bones put the caliper in a slightly weird position. It was a little bit off center, so I just had to adjust that. And also the calipers that were supplied were trailing calipers, not leading. So a trailing caliper mounts at the back, whereas a leading mounts at the front. And the reason that's important is because the piston sizes are actually different between the leading and the trailing piston inside the caliper. The reasoning for that is, as the rotor rotates, if you apply the brakes, it sort of pinches the pad at that point when the pad grips down on the disc, and you end up with tapered pad wear. So if you had the same piston in both ends, the upper part of the pad would wear a fair bit faster than the lower part of the pad. So what you end up with in practice is you have a larger piston down the bottom, so you're applying more force to the bottom of the pad, and that evens out that wear, and you get a nice even sort of application of the brake pad to the rotor. Pretty easy to fix. All I had to do was swap the bleed nipples. So these were originally on the bottom where the bridge currently is, so I'll just remove the bridge, put that down the bottom, relocated the bleed nipples to the top, and now it's set up so that the smaller piston is at the top and the larger piston is at the bottom. 4 pads, that's WinMax W6.5 pads for the front. They're a tarmac rally pad. They turn on real quick, so like 1 or 2 corners you're up to speed, which is great for the rally sprints that I do. But they're still good out to 800 degrees Celsius at the top end, so they're really good for long circuit sessions, and quite a lot of circuit racers use them for their races. I've had really good results with these in the past, so I'll keep running them. They're the best pad I've used to date. In the rear, I've got a couple of steps down. It's a WinMax W3. That's because most of the weight in these cars is up front, and you can see the relative sizes of the brake packages back that up. Huge, tiny. So yeah, so that along with the wheelwood adjustable bias valve means you can get the rear balance dialed in exactly where it needs to be, and not locking up the rears and getting all out of shape. Also gutted the doors. So these doors, when fully dressed and stock, weigh about 30 kilograms. I've pulled these down to 14 kilograms, so that's 16 kgs per door removed. That's significant. Really happy to be able to do that. So obviously cut out the inner skin, cut out the side intrusion bar, which I don't need anymore because I have a full roll cage, and the windows are gone too. I still need to add in Lexan windows, which will be quite light, and also some sort of door card, which will probably just be like a thin sheet of carbon fibre or aluminium. That won't add too much weight back in, so yeah, pretty happy with that. And finally, in the interior, I've got a new seat. So this is a Racetech 4100 HR tall model. I previously had the Race Tech, just standard size, but I found the head restraints which a little bit too low for me, so I'm 6'1". That was always the plan, is buy the standard seat, see if I did fit in it. In this case I didn't, so what I'll then do is take the standard seat and install that on the co-driver side. So all the rally sprint events I have a co-driver, so I needed 2 seats regardless, and that's why I started with buying the standard. This tool has a wider sort of frame to it. The seat itself is the same size, they're just sort of more padding on the inside. So I had to design and make some custom seat side mounts, which then bolt to the existing sort of mounts that are welded into the chassis when the cage was done. That's all sorted, seat's in a perfect position for me now, really happy with the ergonomics. Also missing an accelerator pedal, so what I'll be installing is a Bosch Motorsport drive-by-wire throttle pedal, because this will have an electronic throttle body. So this needs to get mounted up in here somewhere. The firewall at the back's not very flat, so I'll need to make some sort of bracket to have that fit in. I'll do that at a later date. Hopefully it's simple, but we'll see how we go. There's a lot of complex shapes in there, but it does look to fit quite nicely alongside where the original pedal mounted, because there's quite the kick over in this pedal. So yeah, I'll leave that for a later date. Lastly, I've got the engine back from the mechanic. So Focky at P&D Professional Mechanical is a complete gun. He does heaps of Hondas and has the fastest, I guess, 2-litre Honda in the state at the moment. So he's just done a bunch of refresh work to this and a few simple modifications. As a reminder, it's a K20-Z1 out of a DC5 Integra Type S. That's kind of the highest power of all the K-series engines, apart from the Japan-only Type R models. So what I've done to that is installed Toda Spec C camshafts, full titanium retainers, got some valve springs in here as well. Toda adjustable exhaust cam gear and a 40-degree VTC intake cam gear. Got ATI super damper. Those are super handy. Friends have had really good results of those. These motors love to vibrate, especially with the near solid engine mounts that we run in the cars. So these super dampers help pull a lot of that out and prolong the life of the engine, as well as everything else in the car that doesn't like being vibrated. Got new tensioners, new water pump, new gaskets, new seals. Just basically went through the engine and did a major service to it. Installed the Unit 2 Elite sump. It's a massive sump, it takes like 9 litres. It's very well baffled, pretty much as good as you can get before going to a dry sump. And I've got the gearbox on the engine now too. So Focky had previously built the gearbox probably 6 or 8 months ago. It's got a close ratio gear set in it, which I'm really looking forward to using. So it does about like 90 kilometers an hour in first gear, which is a really tall first gear. And then it uses a combination of, so first and second gear are an aftermarket one, I think they're GearX. And third through sixth are a combination, like a pick and mix of OEM Honda ratios. Ends up using like a Honda Accord fifth gear as the sixth gear in this. So it's quite a tight set. Really good for keeping the engine in the power band, which is what I'm looking forward to. Had a XCD heavy duty clutch and light and flywheel installed on it as well. The stock clutch just needed to be replaced, so it makes sense to go for a slightly updated unit. I won't actually need the extra power holding. This is probably still going to make, let's say, 220, 230 horsepower at the wheels, so nothing major. So this is all ready to go. What I'll probably do, spend the rest of the day doing, is get this back in the engine bay, get all the mounts sorted out for that, get everything installed in there, and then start installing the other little bits and pieces. So
You wanna cry, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose. my downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side. My love, you say you wanna try, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose.
Alright, well that went pretty smoothly until it didn't. Had a bit of a struggle, so the rear mount back there, I forgot to flip that to the higher setting to make sure that the engine's sort of higher up, like I was saying before. So when it came to trying to align those bolts that go to the gearbox down there, they just didn't want to play ball. So I figured that out after about 15 minutes of struggling, and as soon as that happened, all went in sweet as. Yeah, the rest of it was pretty smooth. Everything fits quite nicely. Just had to do a few little rigging changes to get the centre of balance correct. Kept wanting to sort of slip away to one side. But yeah, as far as engine installs go with one person, that was pretty good, about an hour. So that's all in, everything's all tight, all sitting pretty nicely. At the higher level, it does clear the bonnet quite well. What I haven't tested is the power steering pump, which sits on here. That sits up quite high, that's likely to fail. That's not a big issue. I may still decide to run electric power steering, I haven't decided yet. If that's the case, then I'll have a power steering pump probably somewhere down in that corner, which obviously no issues. So that's it for engine install. What I'll do now is just chuck in a few of those extra bits into the engine bay to dress it out a little bit. Alright, so I just spent the last hour or so taking on some little bits and pieces. So a few extras been added to the bay. So we have the fuel surge tank with the fuel pump installed up in the back. Fuel filter mounted there on the strut tower. Ethanol content sensor down on the frame rail. And the catch can also there on the frame rail. I've got the clutch slave cylinder on and the clutch line installed. It's quite a long soft line, so I sort of routed that right through the back, get it clean out of the way. And also got this track tough swirl pot, so very stoked to try this. I think a lot of people have had great results for them. K-series engines are quite hard to bleed coolant for, so what this does is essentially it just self bleeds the whole time. It acts as a high point, but also the swirling motion of the coolant running into that naturally removes a lot of the bubbles and they'll just collect up the top. So hopefully it'll help this thing stay pretty cool. Also chucked on a K-tuned sort of rotatable thermostat housing, so once the radiator's installed we can get that pointed straight at the radiator sort of intake tube. And last but not least, got the Home Developments master cylinder brace installed. Thankfully it just clears the K-series valve cover. Earlier when I was bleeding the brakes, the firewall flex is sort of like 4 or 5 millimeters. When you're at full pedal, it's actually quite considerable. So that's made a massive difference. I now can no longer bottom out the pedal. It's rock hard, which is pretty good. It's been a while since the last one. It's been lots of little fiddly jobs, so taking up heaps of time. I'm also about 30 hours deep into planning the wiring harness, which we'll get to later. It's been a learning experience. I haven't done it before and there's a lot to it. And me being me, I've made a giant spreadsheet to make my life easier. Just on the car itself, so a bit more done to the engine bay. Got the Skunk 2 intake manifold. That's had a adapter plate welded to it for Bosch drive-by-wire throttle body. I think it's a 68mm throttle body. I definitely want to run drive-by-wire. It makes things a lot easier. You can have auto blip on downshifts and way better idle control. It's just an all-round better solution. Fuel rail was on, just got the stock injectors in there for now. I've ordered some Bosch 1000s to go in there. Radiators mounted. Hoses are run, just a basic setup with some 90s and a straight. Not too much else in the engine bay. I have measured up and ordered all the fittings for the fuel lines and the catch can lines. That'll come through in the next episode, I think. And outside of that, there's not really much left in the engine bay itself, apart from, the wiring, which I'm doing, and just dressing it out with, headlights and all other bits and pieces that are still missing. Also installed the shifter and cables, so we can see the cables running through here, the APS through the firewall. And up to the Acuity adjustable shifter. This thing's a beast, it's really nicely put together. I just picked up a sort of cheap gland off eBay. It's about $20 to go through the firewall. That's turned out pretty nice. Shift feel was pretty nice and positive, which was what I was after. Not too much else in the interior. I've got the seat back in, and I've also got the throttle pedal installed, so I'll wander around there and show you that. So this is a Bosch drive-by-wire throttle pedal position sensor. It actually wasn't too bad to get that mounted up after all. So you can see I've bolted it just to the right of where the factory accelerator pedal goes, and because there's a bend in the pedal, it sort of brings it out to pretty much where the factory pedal was. It's a little bit to the right. That doesn't worry me. I've got wider pedal pads, and like I mentioned before with the electronic throttle body, I have auto blip downshifts anyway, so heel toe is not a concern. But it does still work. So pretty simple bracket. It just bolts into a couple of locations into the factory sort of sheet metal, and then the pedal just bolts straight to that. Had to get in there with a hammer to make a little bit of room for the connector up the top. It was just a couple of taps with a mallet, got the sheet metal out the way, all good. On to the wiring side of things. I've made a mount to capture my ECU and PDM. That's just a sheet of 3mm carbon fibre. There's some U-bolts attaching that to the roll cage tubing, which I'll chuck in some photos of. And also got little rubber isolator mounts, which between the carbon fibre and the ECU and PDM. That's super important in a race car, especially a K-series race car, because those engines vibrate like shit. So yeah, it really helps prolong the life of your electronics. Pretty nice, neat solution. Pretty happy with how that turned out. And it's in a good spot out of the way. The co-driver or any passengers, they could theoretically kick it if they want to, but they'll have a foot box in here as well, which will have like a plate for their feet to push up against, so their feet shouldn't be wandering anywhere near that. So what I'll do now, I'll jump across to my computer and start running through the wiring planning that I've done. Okay, welcome to my computer. Let's have a look at what I've done for planning the wiring. To start with, I'll go through what I'm using for electronics. I've got the Haltech Nexus R3 ECU. I did originally have an Elite 1500, but when the R3 came out, it was a much better solution, so I've sold off that and grabbed an R3. Super good concept of combining sort of a small PDM with an ECU itself, so it can control most of the engine side of things. It's got 4 25 amp circuits and up to 6 8 amp circuits, but I use a couple of those for the throttle body. And the rest of the specs are pretty similar to the Elite, so 11 analog voltage inputs and up to another 5 or 6 if using unused SPIs. And everything else that I need to run a pretty simple 4-cylinder engine. That doesn't have enough power sort of management to run the whole car though. So I've also got a Haltech PD16 PDM that's got another 4 25 amp circuits and I think, 10 or 12 8 amp circuits on top of that as well. Combined, they just cover everything to keep the car running. I've got a pretty comprehensive set of sensors in the car. We'll get to that when I get to the spreadsheet. But between the two, they do a pretty good job, and it's pretty economic as well. So combined, these are probably something in the region of 5,000 Australian dollars, compared to something like $12,000 to $15,000 for an equivalent Motec setup, which is a massive jump. And for me, I just don't, nothing. The Haltech does everything that the Motec does for me because I have a very simple engine setup. So yeah, no real need to go super fancy. So to start with, what I wanted to do was essentially just list all the things that I need to cover in the wiring harness. I don't really know anything about doing this. This is the first time I've done it, so the High Performance Academy courses were super handy, just doing their club level like wiring fundamentals and club level wiring course. That taught me quite a few things, some things to look out for and rules of thumb. But with myself being an engineer, I love spreadsheets, so creating a giant spreadsheet to capture all of this was always a given, and it has, I think it's definitely made it easier, but it's taken a lot of time. I've probably got 20 or 30 hours into the spreadsheet by itself, including heaps of research to learn stuff along the way. So step one for me was to list everything, all the inputs and outputs, so everything that needs to be on the harness and controlled or included. So I broke that down into areas. So I started with the engine and transmission, excluding the sensors. So this just covers things like the ignition coils, the fuel injectors, the throttle body, and the various small bits and pieces like the alternator, starter motor, and the solenoids that run the VTEC and VTC systems. And what I did for that is just looking at inrush and steady current draw, just looking up the specs of things online to figure out what that was. Figuring out the drive side, this is a concept that I had to learn. So high side drive means you switch the power to turn it on and off, and low side drive means you switch the ground to turn it on and off, and there's reasons for doing that, but high side drive is the easiest way to go for me, but a lot of the stuff uses low side drive for reasons I won't get into it. Also identified what the pinout type was, so the type of function that needs to control this from the ECU or the PDM, and just noted down what the actual physical thing was. So yeah, like my OEM coil packs, Bosch injectors. I've actually ended up going with a 1000cc injector now just for a bit more headroom, Bosch throttle body, and so on. This pinout reference all came later once I'd done the second tab, so we'll get to that later. Second section was all the sensors. So starting with all the sensors that you need to run the engine. So manifold air pressure, which I'm using the onboard map sensor on the Haltech. Intake air, a fuel sensor, oil pressure, and coolant. So the reason these are all pressure and temperature, especially for things that aren't super common like that, like fuel, is because Bosch does a really neat combined pressure and temperature sensor. So it's just one sensor that does both functions. So might as well just grab a couple of those to cover the fuel and coolant as well as oil. And then we have the position sensors. So you have a crank position sensor and you have two cam position sensors. The reason the K20 has two cam position sensors is the intake cam is variable timing, that's the VCT. And so what it does, the engine uses the exhaust cam position, which is static or doesn't change, to know where the engine is, and then it also needs the intake cam position in order to move it around and change that timing with whatever the tuner inputs into it. Got throttle position sensors. So with drive-by-wire you have redundant sensor systems. So you have two throttle position sensors and two pedal position sensors, which is all integrated into the pedal and the throttle body itself. Knock sensor, obviously, I'll swap out the stock one to a Bosch 2-pin style sensor. Wideband oxygen sensor, of course. Ethanol content, because I'll be running this as full flex fuel. Fuel level sender, just using the stock fuel level sender in the stock tank. Vehicle speed and reverse engagement from the gearbox. Clutch switch on the clutch pedal, so that'll be used for things like launch control and also flat shifting. And brake pressure sensors for the front and rear brake circuits. These are quite handy from a data point of view, so very happy to have those in there. Same with the rest of this stuff. So some of these are future, I haven't bought any of it yet. But steering angle is quite important to know, so understanding what you're doing, into and through a corner. And also damper travel, so that really lets you get into the weeds of how your suspension is working and how you can tune it. These will be a future thing. I'll sort of get the car up and running first before I get into that level of data analysis. And in future I'll also look at tyre pressures and temperatures. Haltech does a neat sort of CAN solution for tyre pressure and temperature, which has internal sensors on each wheel, but it only gets you like a singular temperature. It's not an array across the tyre, which is the handy bit that I want. So I'll probably look at something like an Easy Racing setup, which has an array of temperature sensors, like infrared sensors that shoot temperature across the tyre, and that's super handy for seeing what your tyre's doing in the corner. Lots of sensors, that's like 41 different sensors in total, all for a simple little 4-cylinder. Next is the chassis side of things, which is split into forward of the firewall and rear of the firewall. So forward of the firewall in the engine bay, we have the fuel pump for the surge tank, because the surge tank's in the engine bay. Have the radiator fan, have all your headlights and your indicators, and just like wiper and horn, pretty basic stuff. And here I'll just call out that I've got a light bar. So a lot of the events that we do here, Tarmac Rally Sprint, are held at night and not very well lit areas, so it's pretty essential to have a light bar to see where you're going. And every other bulb in the car will be LED as well. One, you get better light output, but mainly it's because the current draw is so much lower than an incandescent bulb, which is very much needed when you're sort of trying to pack a whole bunch of them onto a single PDM circuit. And down to the interior side of the chassis, we have the fuel lift pump in the main tank. We have a heated windscreen, so I've gone for a windscreen that has integrated heater circuits, so much like a demister circuit you have in your rear windscreen in most road cars. You can get versions of that for front windscreens. It uses a tungsten element, which is apparently pretty well invisible, and they work quite well. And because I don't have a heater or anything in the car, this is pretty essential whenever the weather's going to be bad. And I don't really want to try and rig up like a 12-volt heated blower setup. It's just not going to work very well, so I'm looking forward to the screen. It is pretty grunty. It uses two 25-amp circuits. I need to have a CAN hub to connect all the CAN devices in the car. Things like the keypad, that's all via CAN, and that will control the entire car. My data logger. In future I'll have a dash display, but for a start I'm just going to use the data logger because that can show me pressures and temperatures as well. Things like a USB power hub to run, cameras or charge batteries or whatever I need, and all the rear lights. Because to start with I'm not going to run a proper dash display, I'm just going to use the data logger. I do want a warning light, so Motec does a nice 2-stage LED warning light. So when, while I can see temperatures and pressures on the data logger itself, I do want something to flash at me whenever something gets into a bad state. So I'll set that up so that the ECU triggers that whenever temperatures get too high or oil pressure gets too low or whatever it might be. And that'll be super handy because it immediately draws my attention to it and I can back out of it. There will also be strategies like programmed into the ECU to cut power in the event of low oil pressure or all sorts of things. So just the general safety. So once I created that big long list of everything that I want to include in the wiring harness, what it needs to connect to and from, then translate that to this next tab. So essentially what I've done here is break down every single pin on every connector for the ECU and the PDM. And if we jump across to the wiring diagrams, we can see Haltech's done a really good job of graphically laying this out. So I've kind of just taken all that and turned it into a spreadsheet so I can assign all my inputs and outputs to it. And also things like wire colors and coding, because I do it slightly differently to what Haltech does. So that's the one for the R3. This is the one for the PD16. And that's just all translated across into one big list of connectors with all the different pins and their functions. These all have a primary function, obviously, but some of them will have a secondary function. So for an example, the unused injectors, you can use those as digital pulsed outputs to control whatever you want. I just don't have that much to control, so most of those are left as spare. So to generate this list, I populated all the pins and that based on what the wiring diagram says. And then I started just assigning things from the inputs and output sheet to this list. So the 4 fuel injectors, give them a reference back to that list on the first tab, bring across their current and so on to calculate wire size. And just repeated that through every connector through the ECU. So we can see here they're all pretty populated, or they're shown as spare. That was quite a lengthy process to get that right. with the amount of sensors that I'm running, I've maxed out all of the analog voltage inputs, and because they have a synchronized pulsed input, which you can also use as an AVI, maxed out all of those across the PDM and the ECU to get all the sensors in, but it just works, which is good. From a power circuit point of view, I think I've got 3 spare 8 amp circuits left, and I haven't been particularly efficient or optimized with how I've used the other ones, so there's quite a lot of room there if I ever need to integrate more things into the system. So yeah, like I said, I've populated all that. Some of these pins have a heap of connections, like the sensor ground, for example, has all of the sensors attached to that same one pin, so they're just like a massive branch point right after that. Same with sensor supply. And moving into the power circuits, the Nexus R3 has 4 25 amp power circuits, so that runs basically the engine side of things, so it runs the ignition coils, the starter motor solenoid, the main fuel pump and the surge tank, and the radiator fan. It would also run the fuel injectors if they needed heaps of current, but they're pretty low current ones, so just a normal 8 amp output in the ECU can run those. And down onto the PD16, we have split all the circuits up by sort of area of the car and function. So all of the headlights and all the stuff that happens when you turn your low beam switch on, that's on one circuit. So your headlights, your tail lights, and your number plate lights. Each side of indicators is on its own circuit. Brake lights are on their own circuit. Reverse lights, rain light, horn, and so on. The PDM can take a few sensor inputs, so I've done that as well. So that's things like the fuel level, the clutch switch, steering angle, and the damper travel ones, which I'll put in future. And the 25 amp circuits on the PDM, that's running the fuel pump in the main tank, the headlight high beams, which includes the light bar, so together they draw a fair bit of current, and the 2 circuits for the heated windscreen, like I talked about earlier. So once I generated that big list, I knew everything that I needed to connect, and I knew where I needed to connect it to. So now it's time to look at stuff like the wiring colours and just coming up with like a code so I can understand what's going on in the harness. And very professional level harnesses, they just use all the same colour wiring, and their planning and their diagrams tells people what's what. I'm not that good, so I want something that visually tells me which wire is which. So to do that, I've kind of slightly modified the Haltech way of doing things. Back on the screen here, I've got my references. So this wire color key is taken straight from the High Performance Academy course. So every power wire will be red, every ground wire will be black, every sensor ground wire will be green, every sensor power wire will be orange. They run their own dedicated circuits to minimize electrical noise. And literally everything else will be white. So all of your sensor signals, everything will just be white. That makes for a lot of white wires, which is hard to tell what's going on. So then what I've done is referring back to the Haltech wiring diagrams. You can see they have their own colouring system with their wires. They have a primary and a secondary colour. And what I can buy is tiny little wee rings of heat shrink. So there's basically like a 2mm or a 3mm length of heat shrink that come in heaps of different colours, and I can use those as little like colour codes to attach to each wire. And I've done that basically with the same colours as the Haltech. So the wire code key, all the different little heat shrink rings come as these 10 colours here. And what I've then done, if we go back to this tab, is the wire code. I've basically just matched that to Haltech. So things like fuel injectors, that's it's a white wire because it falls under the everything else category. But to identify which injector is which, I'll just use the Haltech codes. So blue, blue, black, blue, red, and blue, orange. And that matches exactly what we've got set up here. So blue, blue, black, blue, brown, and blue, red. That's probably not an exact match. And the reason I've done some slight discrepancies from it is to avoid double ups. Because between the R3 and the PDM, there are some things that are, kind of the same between them. And because I've got one integrated harness running both devices, I did make some small changes to avoid double ups. So I went through everything and assigned all of that. Heaps of different codes. I ran some checks to make sure there was no double ups. and got that all set up. So once that's all built, I can look at any wire in the system and understand straight away pretty much exactly what it is by looking at the colour of the wire and the little code tags on it, and I can just cross-reference that back to this list and figure out exactly where it is. Next step after that was to look at the downstream connectors. So obviously at one end it connects to the ECU or the PDM, but at the other end, what does it connect to? So we just went through each item by item and just identified what that connector was. So whether it's the OEM connectors, then you can actually buy all those new, which is super handy. Whether it's, like other ECU connectors, whether it's DTM, Bosch, all the different types, just depending on what the device is that it's connected to. Also, where I did know or could find out, I put the pin reference for those downstream connectors. So it's a pretty comprehensive list of exactly, whatever pin on the ECU or PDM goes to whatever pin on any device. You can find any info you want out of the spreadsheet. So that all took a pretty long time. Like I said, I enjoy large spreadsheets. This is how my brain works. So now I have one big comprehensive, repository of information. And that'll be perfect for building the harness from this. It's been a couple of months since the last video. As usual, life gets in the way, but have been chipping away at a bunch of small things in the background. When we last left off, I'd pretty much completed all the wiring planning, so had done a giant spreadsheet to capture all the information and map everything out, and also had done a dummy loom just out of rope to figure out where everything runs in the car. Since then, have spent an inordinate amount of money on wiring materials, so that's all laid out, ready to go. That's this week's task, is to build the wiring loom. Lots involved in that. This is quite an expensive endeavour, but it's a lot of stuff that I can continue using for future projects, so good investment. All the materials, just got proper race spec wire in various gauges. Borrowed a heat shrink label printer off my friend Travis. Thanks for that. That'll be super handy to label everything. And everything else is just connectors, little wiring ID tags, all sorts of bits and pieces that go into it. Outside of that, not a heap of progress on the car itself. I have done a fair bit of tidying up in the engine bay. First is the obvious one, is a brand new Type R valve cover, so that really cleans things up compared to the sort of pretty beat up old silver standard one. I've got a black dipstick ready for that as well. Get rid of that unsightly orange one. Installed radiator fan. That's a bit too close to the radiator hose, so I might actually put that on the front of the radiator instead. Done all the fuel lines. This is all nice, super fancy BMRS sort of convoluted Teflon tubing stuff with crimp fittings, just from Wanted Motorsport here in Perth. Not the cheapest thing around, but also not that much more expensive than doing it with the cheap China stuff, and the end result is really fantastic. So it's a relatively complex setup with a bunch of lines going into and out of the surge tank. Got the flex fuel sensor down there, fuel filter running into the rail goes to fuel pressure regulator, then back to the return. Also on the firewall you can see I've got some bulkhead connectors. The large one is for the engine loom and the smaller one down the bottom is for the chassis loom. These are essentially the cheapest you can get. They're Deutsch HDP, they're sort of plastic bodied ones. They're still really expensive, but such a neat and good solution. Beauty about these is if you ever need to take the engine out, essentially it's just a click and away you go, the whole thing comes out. So looking forward to using those. I don't intend to take the engine out very often, but it is a really clean way to pass it through the firewall rather than just a big grommet like most people use. So I've got a power stud coming through, so the positive battery cable will come through there. The battery will be mounted just inside the firewall, and that'll feed the alternator and starter motor, well, take from the alternator. Yeah, that's really about it for the rest of that. I think the interior is basically as we left it. I've designed some brackets to mount the dash and, well, AIM Solo data logger. It's not too much of a dash, but it does the job. And the 15-button CAN keypad, they'll be mounted directly off the cage and the steering column. So when those come in, I'll show you those too. That's about it for a project update. basically now I'm going to start laying things out and get stuck into the wiring itself. Okay, so first step for me was to run all the battery cables. I didn't film that process because I didn't think it was going to take very long, but it's taken me half a day, which is bloody ages. Turns out it was fairly complex. It looks complex, it looks very messy. I'll tidy this up with some cable management later, and the passenger footwell, whenever there are passengers in the car, they'll have like a foot box which prevents them from contacting all this anyway. The battery, which is a lithium motorcycle battery, that's obviously connected directly to the chassis as the ground, but also straight through to the Haltech Nexus as per their instructions. The PDM also needs to connect straight to the battery, but I'll do that later when I do the main harness because it's just smaller wires. And then I have a solid state battery isolator. It's a Tyco or TE branded isolator, which isolates the positive feed to the ECU and the PDM when the kill switches are pushed. But it does mean that the battery is always connected to the alternator, so that when you do kill the engine, that sort of overflow current, I guess, has somewhere to go rather than into the ECU. So yeah, not my proudest work. It doesn't look super great, but we'll hide all that behind some shiny aluminium foot boxes when we get to that point. Same deal in the engine bay. I've just run a cable. You can see there's a stud in the firewall there. That stud runs through, and then there's a cable that goes to the alternator and the starter motor. And I've got a couple of grounds running from the engine to the chassis as well. So that about covers it for the power side of things. Now I'll probably get started on some of the interior wiring, getting the harnesses ready for the rear lights and the fuel pump and all that stuff. Alright, update time. My garage is a complete mess, but that's all good. I'm making some progress. I've got a bit of a workstation set up with the wiring tools and my laptop with my giant spreadsheet and wiring diagram. I'm starting to work through laying out the wire in the car itself, so I'll move over and see what I've got up to. I started off with the rear half of the chassis harness. It interfaces at the back with the factory sort of lighting harness. I did modify that to strip out everything that we didn't need and added an extra one for the rain light that we run for motorsport here, and that ends up a connector over on that wheel well. So I've then run all the wires from the PDM out through the back there. You can see each wire's got little identification colours on it, little coloured bands of heat shrink. That all matches up with the colours in my spreadsheet, so I know which wire is which, instead of just a sea of red or white wires as we go through. Just in case you're interested, red means power, white is sort of signal, or pretty much anything. Green is signal ground, orange is sensor 5 volt supply, and a few other bits like that. Just a basic sort of setup so I know what's going on. So the way I did all this is I've got these stick-on cable tie mounts and just loosely ran a cable tie through it, and that lets me sort of route all the wiring where it needs to go, and then once it's all in the final position, I come along and using this sort of capped on tape, group it all together neatly and tightly to make sure that it all runs pretty smooth and doesn't sort of wave around a bit. So that's the rear half of the chassis harness all run. Comes up here and either goes to the main branch point or directly into the PDM. There's a few bits down there that go to there. The next step for that would be to sort of take the harness out of the car and then probably up until about here, sheath it in the sort of braided covering and also terminate it. So once it lays back in the car, put the connectors on which go to the various bits and pieces that it connects to, get it all plugged in and then secured properly in those cable tie mounts. I may or may not do that though. I might actually run the rest of the chassis harness, which runs up underneath the dash to the sort of steering wheel area, so that covers like the dash display, the clutch switch, a few bits and pieces like that. I've also run all the battery cables as you saw last time, so they're still in the way and not looking great, but is what it is. So we can't do too much about it. And I have run the extras, the PDM grounds as well now, so that it'll all run to that same grounding point over there. That's about it for now. I'm not bothering to film what I'm actually doing because it's quite boring. I'm just sort of clambering around the car, running wire after wire, sort of individually. It takes quite a long time. But yeah, I'll just keep checking in on progress as we keep going. Okay, back again with another update. It's been the last few hours running all the dash wiring. So there's a whole bunch that runs underneath the dash up by the firewall, over towards the steering wheel. So we have a clutch switch, the drive-by-wire throttle pedal, some sort of power that's going to like a little USB hub I'm going to run by the keypad, steering angle sensor provision, and also a warning light which will be going in there. Not too many in that section, but a giant pain in the ass because of positioning. So basically I was on my back for 2 hours straight running all those. Not very fun. That completes, I guess, the wire runs for the interior part of the harness. I do need to do everything across from the ECU and the PDM to the bulkhead connectors. I might do that now so I can actually finish off this part of the harness. But yeah, I'll keep working on it. Again, it's pretty boring to see me contorting myself in the car running wiring, so I'll just do some check-ins each time I've got some progress. And after a few more hours of work, the chassis side of the wiring is all run and ready to go. So obviously nothing's terminated yet. You can just see it all runs to either the bulkhead connectors or the ECU and PDM connectors. Now what I need to do is make sure it's all taped up and cable tied in the right spots so it doesn't fall apart, and then take it out of the car so I can sheath it up and get it ready to, crimp all the pins on and get that ready to plug in. So I'll start on that now and we'll check in once that's done. Okay, so I just spent a bit of time cleaning up the interior loom after I got it out of the car. So a lot of that was crimping together a bunch of the shared wires, stuff like sensor ground and sensor plus 5 volt supply. Also just sort of went through how all the branches are run and just make sure they're reinforced with cable ties and stuff for strain relief. And just double checked everything that was there, make sure it's in the right spot. So looks a lot neater than what it was in the car. This is where it goes to the bulkhead connectors. I'll do those last. And this is where it matches up with the ECU plugs, and this is where it matches up with the PDM plugs. So what I want to do now is get some braided sleeving on and heat shrink to secure that in each location. So I'll do that now. Okay, so I finished sheathing up and terminating the interior harness for the most part. What I have left to do is the bulkhead connectors. So before I get onto those, I need to test fit in this in the car and get the exact length between the ECU plugs and the bulkheads, just to make sure I'm trimming that at the right spot. And then I'll mock it all up on this table, mount the bulkheads on the table and put them all in there. Turned out pretty decent. So over here, this is the harness that runs over to the steering wheel side of the car. So we've got the throttle position sensor, indicator, clutch switch, and a couple of things to feed the dash and the warning light. Over here, this is the harness that runs to the rear of the car. So we've got the fuel pump and the main tank, rear shock pot sensors, rear lights, that sort of thing. It's all just sheathed up in sort of this high temperature braid, then with glue lined heat shrink on all the joins. And over in this bit, got the main ground where it even goes to the ground point where the battery is. Other side indicator, PDM plugs here. This goes off to the CAN hub to distribute CAN amongst the car. These plugs here are 2 big power circuits actually for the heated windscreen. So I've got a windscreen that has like sort of little tungsten wire heating elements embedded inside it. So that way I don't need like a blower when it's raining. So there'll be a future when that's fitted up. And got the CAN connection to the ECU as well. And these are the ECU plugs. The only one I don't have is I was missing a DTP4 connector. I forgot to order it for the third VCU connector. This is the power circuits out of the VCU to run like the main fuel pump and the radiator fan and stuff. So that's coming soon. That's pretty easy to crimp on. Through this bit, I've learned some good lessons. Like I've said before, this is the first time that I've done any of the wiring at this sort of level before. So the design of all this routing didn't turn out particularly great. I've kind of got too many things happening in too many places, and I needed to make it cleaner for next time. But I did manage to find at the local Bunnings some kind of like split braided loom, so that way I could kind of just slip it over rather than having to ship it on from the end, because that wasn't going to work because there's too many branches in the way. So good enough for the interior of the car. It's probably not heat rated like the proper braided sheathing is for the engine bay, but the engine bay harness is designed differently and better, and should all be able to be sort of run back to one point without having like a stranded run of wires in the middle. Same deal for this. I'm going to have to get some split braided looming and just sort of slip it over as we go around, but I'll do that once everything's terminated on the bulkheads and ready to go. So yeah, next up I'll get this test fitted in the car, measure up the bulkhead, get that trimmed, get that crimped and terminated, and then that interior harness is complete. There's a lot of work in this. I've probably got like 20 or 30 hours just into this one piece, but I'm learning a lot as I go, and hopefully it'll be a lot quicker for doing the engine bay side of things. Alright, that's us done for the interior harness. So terminated both of the bulkhead connectors, got the boots heat shrink down onto those. Everything's wrapped up, so yeah, got the last little bit of sheathing on. It's all pretty tidy and ready to go. For a first attempt, pretty happy with that. I deliberately did the interior harness first because I think the engine bay harness is more important, being in a hot environment. So I know a bit more about what I'm doing for that one. But yeah, that's probably a good 30 hours of work just to get that together. There's so much involved in this, but definitely will be a lot faster the next time I do it. Anyway, we'll get that in the car, all mounted up and secured and ready to go, and then eventually we'll kick into the engine bay harness. Okay, and installed in the car. So we've got the bulkheads going through into the engine bay, top one for the engine, bottom one for the chassis. ECU connectors, PDM connectors, all the battery powers and grounds, and then the isolator. The harness runs underneath the dash over towards the steering column. You can see I've mounted up my AIM Solo 2 as an interim dash. It'll do a good enough job, and I've got a warning light on top of that. So that warning light will sort of flash at me when I set some ECU parameters that something's going majorly wrong, and that can tell me to turn the car off. Back through the car, harness runs down the side. Connects up to the fuel pump, connects up to the fuel level sender. I've got some plugs back there for rear shock potentiometers in the future. And then we also run up to the back there where we connect into the rear light circuit. So yeah, that's all done now. Time to move on to engine bay. Okay, so next up was the engine bay harness for the B bulkhead connector, which is the chassis side of it, not the engine side of it. Didn't really bother filming me putting it together, but it's all finished now. Turned out a lot better than the interior harness, mainly because I've got practice now, so it's all good. There was one minor stuff up. I accidentally joined both indicators on the same circuit, which is not good because you want to indicate left or right. So I just had to run a separate wire down to that to replace that. So this is the bulkhead connector where it joins up to the firewall. Heading out to fuel pump wiring, brake pressure switches, windscreen wiper, left headlights, left indicator, LED light bar for when I do nighttime events, radiator fan, which I haven't terminated yet because I'm waiting on a connector to arrive, the factory horn, right hand headlights, right hand indicator, and an allowance for the right hand shock travel sensor at the front. Getting slightly quicker at it, still a lot. There's probably like 20 hours in this. So next up, I'll try and get a time lapse on of me laying out the engine harness, and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so let me just explain what was just happening on the time lapse there. Firstly, we can see that I've installed the chassis part of the harness, so that all runs up to the various places. Headlights are connected, got a horn, etc. That's all in there nicely now. So for the engine harness itself, I've only done part of it, just the part that runs up over the engine block into the coils. You'll see me first start over at the desk. So here I have my harness layout, and I'm essentially just going branch by branch. So for this bit I started with the wheel pressure and temperature transmitter, then VTEC solenoid, VTC solenoid, crank position sensor, then the 4 coils. So that's everything covered by the harnesses in the car at the moment. On the screen, each of those things has a little colour code as to what colour the wire should be and what colour the little idents are. These are the little idents, they're little wee bits of heat shrink. So based on the coding in the spreadsheet, I'm adding a couple of those to the wire, whichever colour and size it needs to be. Once I've done that, I come back over to the car, and you would have seen me physically run the wire through the car. So starting at the bulkhead connector and then running out to where it needs to go, and then just masking tape it in place at its final location, and then trimming it back at the bulkhead connector to make sure the length is correct. Now when planning the harness, I did measure all the lengths and lay it out with rope in the car, but I didn't do a very good job of it, so I've been doing just sort of the lengths in the vehicle as we go, which is a lot slower. If I'd planned it properly at the start, I can just build it all on the bench and install it. But this way I know it's correct, and it allowed me to fix a few mistakes on the way through as well. So essentially, starting down at the sensors, and then down the bottom we have the oil pressure temperature sensor. Up here we have the VTEC solenoid. Here we have the VTC solenoid. And obviously the crank trigger, crank position sensor is down by the crank pulley. And then we've got the 4 coils. So I just repeated that process for each of those wires, just running them all individually, ticking them off on my spreadsheet, making sure they're identified correctly. And I've just got the colours marked on masking tape there at the bulkhead. So when the time comes for the final trim and termination into the bulkhead connector, I can put the right coloured identifications on those too. But yeah, that's really it. It's just sort of, once I've done each sensor from each branch point, I use this special Teflon tape. This stuff here, it's really expensive, it's like $30 a roll. But it's super thin and really nice and easy to use and heat resistant. So each grouping of wire is taped together to keep it all nice and neat. So individual sensors are all there, and that's grouped together at one branch point in this location here. That same branch then runs all the way back down to here. This will be another main branch point where the ignition coils will split off from all that sensor and solenoid wiring, and there'll be a lot more wiring going around the rest of the engine bay from that same branch point, which I'll do later. Next section is the ignition coils wiring, so that's one big thick power cable which will get spliced into thinner individual power cables to power each coil, and then also the 4 coil triggers here as well. What I haven't done yet and what I'll just do next is the grounds for each of those coils. They'll just be sort of 4 individual grounds, and then I'll tap them into just a little ring terminal here on the head. Yeah, so hopefully that's a somewhat ample explanation of what I'm doing when I'm laying out the harness. This is the 3rd one I've done, so I've done the interior of the car, the chassis side of the engine bay harness, and now I'm doing the engine side of the engine bay harness. So kind of got the hang of it. But like I said, it's still slow going. And not making too many mistakes, which is good, but there's lots of checks and double checks as we go along the way. Anyway, I won't bother with any more time lapse because it's just the same thing. We'll check in once I've laid out the rest of the engine harness. And now we're done with the engine harness. It was actually quite simple to lay out. I think because it's such a linear harness, there's only sort of 2 real branch points on this. The big one down there and a couple of minor ones. Compared to the interior, which went absolutely everywhere, and the chassis side of the engine bay, which also goes absolutely everywhere and has some annoying places to get to. everything laid out pretty nice. You can see like intake air temperature just temporarily there until I get an intake. Throttle body, all the injectors, fuel pressure sensor, got like starter solenoid wiring and knock sensor, all the various bits like the vehicle speed sensor, reverse indicator, reverse lockout solenoid, all sorts going on. But yeah, that all laid out pretty nice. So I've now gripped it up, taped it, put cable ties where the branch points are. Now I'll take it out of the car and start putting the braiding on that and the heat shrink to sheath that up ready for termination. Alright, so after a lot of work, the engine harness is now all sheathed up, terminated and ready to get installed. Just sort of running you through what we do for that. Each individual branch is sort of covered in this high temperature nylon braided sort of sleeving. Just have a little bit of glue lined heat shrink which secures that at each end. I just put on a bit of a label for what it is. There's sort of, you can get heat shrink which is printable in those little label printers. So this is the vehicle speed sensor plug. I bought a whole bunch of new plugs from NRT Automotive, so they're just like a replacement K-series engine set. So all new coil plugs and injector plugs, everything you need. So I just went through the harness bit by bit. There's only sort of a couple of major branch points. This first one here off the main harness, which then splits off into all these different ones. And then a couple other little branch points, like for example in the injector harness, where you can sort of see that one branch point goes up to the different injectors. Down on this end I've got the bulkhead connector which interfaces with the connector on the firewall that has a boot on it, as well as some glue line heat shrink to secure that. So really hoping that it all fits nicely in the car. What I found with the other harnesses that I've done so far is once everything's sort of sheathed and heat shrinked up, kind of shrinks a little bit and it's a bit tougher to get some of the connectors in, so I've made sure I added extra length for this one. Hopefully that works. So yeah, now I'll get that installed into the car and show you once it's all in there and secured. And there we have it, all installed. You can see the bulkhead comes out of the firewall, running down along the shifter cables and splits off into the various places it needs to go. So a few connectors around the gearbox. Still got one left over. I'm waiting for another replacement connector to come in. It's just the reverse sensor, pretty easy to do later on. Also just got the intake air temperature just sitting there for now. Once I get an intake fabricated, obviously that will be part of that. But yeah, everything else is run and pretty much sorted. Got the fuel injectors up here, coils up here, throttle body, a few bits under the intake manifold for like the knock sensor and the alternator, and things like the oil pressure and temperature sensor, VTEC solenoid, VTC solenoid, and crank sensor, which I'll plug in later once I jack the car up. The extra length that I added did work quite well. Everything fits quite nicely, so pretty happy with that. But yeah, for a first attempt, pretty stoked. Also chucked in a tow loop. Seems to be a nice easy place to put it in the engine bay there, rather than sort of having to run it through the bumper. Yeah, so sum total of that's like a good 150 hours work involved in planning the harness, which is what I showed in the previous video, and doing all of this build and install, which is this video. It's a really intense amount of time. I've been trying to work like 20-30 hours a week on this, so it probably took me about 2 odd months to get through all that. Massive undertaking. I learned a heap. By the time I got to that last engine harness there, I think I'd sort of got the hang of it pretty well good. But you know, if there's a next time, I'll be in a lot better position to smash this out a lot quicker. So yeah, huge amount of work. This time it's getting it ready for first start. So I've been beavering away all day. Sun's getting a bit low now. Just checking through things, setting up the base map and the ECU and the PDM, getting the keypad working, checking sensor functionality, all sorts of bits and pieces. So I'll just jump in and show you a few things with that. So it's been a day primarily on the laptop. Basically right at the start I imported a like a base map from a different style of Haltech because I didn't have one for the Nexus R3 that I'm running. And that's a base map for a K20, the specific one that I have, which is a 2005-2006 DC5 Type S. Went through, set up all the different sensors that I'm running, so map sensor, fuel pressure, oil pressure, everything. There's lots in there. Set up the fuel pump outputs. I've got 2 fuel pumps. I've got a lift pump in the main tank behind me, and then a surge pump in the engine bay. Gave those an override button so I can turn those on when the car's not running, for things like getting 98 out of the tank so I can fill it up with the 85. And just kept working through it. So there's a heap of things here. This obviously took me like 6 hours to get through. Setting up thermo fans, same thing, the radiator fans on an override switch so I can turn that on. Set up all the body functions, so indicators left and right. This is the, what am I doing with fog lights? I can't remember. I think that's the rain light at the back. Hazard lights, low beam headlights, high beam headlights, putting the wipers on. The front windscreen demister, so when the windscreen goes back into it, it has filaments in it, like a rear windscreen normally does in a car. So turning those on will demist that. Got the horn working, pit speed limiter. I wanted to set up a variable launch control RPM. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I'll do that at some point. And start stop. So one press to start the car, one press to stop the car. So after I'd set up everything in the ECU, just kind of, like dry without anything powered up, I connected up the battery under there, tested all my relays, made sure it all worked, switched on the ECU and started checking through the sensors one by one to make sure the outputs were correct. That was interesting. I had quite a few issues with my pressure and temperature sensors, so I'm running combined Bosch pressure temperature sensors, like it's one sensor that gives you both. Turns out I'd wired them completely backwards, so I had to just take the connectors off those, de-pin and repin them the right way around, and I got that working. I found some documentation online that told me the wrong way, and I also interpreted it the wrong way. So once I found the right documentation, that was pretty easy to sort out. Got all the sensors working. I then set up my half-assed dash display. So this is an AIM Solo 2 data logger. It's not designed to be a dash, but you can display up to 4 different things on it at a time, which will do for now. I can't afford to spend $4,000 or $5,000 on a proper logging dash at this moment. So I've got a configuration for that, so that reads all the data from the Haltech ECU via the CAN bus, and I've set it up so it tells me sort of like speed, oil pressure, coolant temperature, oil temperature, just the main engine vitals. I don't need to see RPM. These LEDs on the side will show me that once, it acts as a shift light basically. And then this light at the top, I haven't set this up yet either because I don't know how in the Haltech software, but I'm going to have this as like a multi-stage warning light. So I'll have it to flash on, just like stay on when there's like a minor engine issue. So like say it throws a code or something like that. I'll have it flash at me sort of quite slowly, like on and off once a second. If there's a minor issue, so temperature's just gone above a set limit, like your coolant temperature gets to like, let's say 105. So like it's getting up there, but it's not ridiculous. And then I'll have it flash very quickly at me when there's something serious happening. So temperature's gone way too high or oil pressure's gone to nothing. And that's when I need to immediately kill the car and stop it. So once that's all set up, I then filled the fuel system up and primed and checked that. So that's all working. As I said before, I've got a rear pump and a front pump. So I had to run the lift pump first, get all the fuel to come through and fill up the surge tank, and then enable the surge pump so that would then feed the rail, and then check that the pressure was all good. Just adjusted the fuel pressure regulator to set that. So yeah, like I said, lots of stuff around. We're now at the point where I'm pretty close to trying to start the car, but just a general sort of run through functionality. I have my kill switch up the top, and there's a second kill switch on the outside of the car, just down by the A-pillar there as well on the same circuit. So when I press that on, that's going to power up everything, and you'll hear the fuel pump start. So that's all primed up. My dash display is on. You can see the sort of data that's showing there. The ECU buttons are on, that's all good. And these lights, things like horn, I can turn the fans on, hopefully you could hear that fan. Turn the fuel pumps on manually. And then just things like indicators and hazard lights, which I've tested all these and they all work pretty well. To turn it all off again, just press the button, kills everything. This has an internal battery, so it does keep going, so I can just turn that off manually as well. Alright, that's it. I'm just going to hook up a battery charger because I think my battery's had a bit of a flogging. It's just a tiny little lithium. And we'll get ready to start cranking the motor and checking that it builds oil pressure. Alright, so I've just hooked up a battery charger. Hopefully that provides enough juice to keep this thing going, but we will see. And just jumping in the map, the really important thing here is I've disabled the injectors. So in the ECU, it won't fire the injectors even though the thing cranks. So let's have a go and we'll see what happens. The sun is terrible at the moment, so apologies, you probably can't see shit. But what I'll try and do is focus it on the screen and we'll see if the oil pressure measurement seems to come up. Alright, so this one might be a bit easier. We can see it on the screen in the bottom left. Currently it's pretty minimal. I'll probably have, this has like I press the button and it'll cycle for 5 seconds before it starts and then it'll stop. So I'll probably have to do that a few times to get the oil pressure to sort of come up to speed because there's probably nothing in the oil pump at all. Let's have a go. Awesome, that's working perfectly. Alright, we'll take that one off the list. What I'll do now is probably get ready to attempt to fire it up. It's going to be loud as shit because it's got open headers, so apologies to my neighbours, but I won't run it for very long just to check that it actually works. I have no idea if it will or not. It's just the base mat from Heltec, so hopefully all the timing offsets and everything's set up correctly because I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, I'll just re-enable those injectors and we'll have another go. Alrighty, time for a first start. Set you up on a tripod, so I'll jump in and start it up, then I'll very quickly jump out and just start looking around for leaks and everything. And like I said, I won't run it for very long because it's going to be loud as shit. Let's see how we go. Alrighty, that one was a fail. Doesn't seem to be wanting to catch. I did test the injectors, they're all clicking, so I know that's working. I'll just start checking everything from the start and come back once I've done that. Alright, welcome back. It's a new day. Did a bit of troubleshooting last night and the computer is not getting an RPM signal, so just trace that back to I'd put the pins in the wrong way around in the crank sensor connector. I just had it backwards when I was putting them in, so pretty easy fix. Just repin that connector and ran the car up with the injectors disabled before, and I'm seeing RPM signal, so theoretically we're good to go, and we'll have another crack now. and great success, first time. So everything looked pretty good, oil pressure was fine, all the temperatures were looking pretty good. As I said before, it was loud as shit, so my neighbours will hate me, but whatever. That started up, that's perfect. I'll just check over a few fluids and things and probably get the wheels on it and see if it drives backwards and forwards. Right, that's now back on the ground. Let's see if it moves under its own power. Well, it does go forwards, but it does not go backwards. I had trouble getting it, well, couldn't get it into reverse when I was up on the stands. Thought it might change with a bit of rotation from the engine moving, but no deal, so I have to look at that. But it does go into the other gears and moves out pretty well. Very, very stoked with that. Alright, so with that problem with reverse, I had a bit of a play around, and I could shift it into reverse manually activating the shifter on the gearbox itself, but not with the shifter. So what I did is I just ended up removing the lock nut behind this linkage here, just to get a little bit more travel on the shifter cable, and that's done the trick. So that's now getting into reverse nice and easy. So yeah, we have a running and driving car. A lot more to go. Next week the glazier is coming to get the windscreen back in it and the windows. I have a carbon fibre trunk on the way, so I'll probably just put the glass back into the stock steel one here for now. And I've got the Lexan for the carbon one when that shows up, so that'll be a really nice weight saving. And lots of little tidy up jobs. So I've got some side skirts coming, they need to be trimmed up, along with the sill tubes, so that can all get fitted up. It's got to get an exhaust fabricated for it and an intake. Not much room for an intake. I kind of snookered myself with putting this catch can right in the way, but probably what we'll do is route somewhere around here, then down to that front fender well area. So I'll take this off, I think this coming Tuesday, a couple of days away, head up and get exhaust in that fabricated, and then it's booked in for a dyno tune in just under 2 weeks time, so I'll probably just get it back from the exhaust guy and get it up for a dyno. So not much more to do before it goes on the dyno, probably just bleed the coolant, so once it's got an exhaust I'm not going to run it for more than 10 seconds without waking up the whole neighbourhood. I'll get the coolant bled, just run it through a heat cycle, make sure the fan and everything's working and no leaks when it's all up to full temp, and we'll go for a tune and see what it does. Yeah, really happy with the progress. It's been 12 months of hard work. Yeah, like I said in the last video, that wiring really kicked my ass. It's probably 150, 160 hours in total in the wiring, so 4 solid weeks on top of a full-time job, so that made it like 3 or 4 months. But we're there, everything seems to work. I've tested all the sensors, pretty happy for a first time. Just got to get it on the dyno and get it ready. The event that I want to compete in first up is the Bunbury Rally Sprint, which is in 19th of November. We're in 2023 at the moment, so that's about 4 weeks away from today. So a lot of work to do to get there, but we'll push hard and hopefully get in at least one test day beforehand as well. So I'll take you along the journey for that too when it all happens. Last time we left off, I'd finished the wiring and got the car started for the first time. Since then, been to the dyno, had that tuned. I'll put in some footage and a few dyno charts later on. But this weekend have just been getting it ready for track testing. So I've got a private hire at the local racetrack at Wanneroo in Perth later this week, and just got to get a wheel alignment before that and we're good to go. So what I've been doing is just tidying off all the small jobs, getting the cosmetics taken care of, and getting it all ready to go. So first and most obviously is the cosmetics. Just got an eBay front lip, just raw plastic on the front of it, but really cleans it up nicely. I like the look of it. Side skirts, my local fabricator, Frankie at Not Scared, had some PCI style skirts bent and made up, so those are on, and they're all trimmed out for the sill tubes, which is where the axle stands go into the side. Just painted those up in some matte black. And at the back I've got a fake Type R wing just for now. Later on I'll do a proper aero kit on it, but for now this will do the job. I had a crack at painting that with some colour matched paint, just in spray cans, but it turned out alright. Looks good if you don't look too closely at it. It'll do the job for now, but it's by no means perfect. Really stoked with how the car looks. I think it looks really nice and aggressive. The skirts and the front lips and the size of the fitment of the wheels make it look quite aggressive, but it's actually not that low to the ground. Still got heaps of clearance, probably good 4 or 5 inches underneath skirts and lip. Also had some bonnet catches put in, just some aero catches. They actually don't sit down quite far enough, so there's a small gap in the front of the bonnet. It lines up well with the guards, but not quite with the bumper, so I've just put some rubber weather strip along there to hide that gap somewhat. Also had an exhaust made up, 3-inch the whole way through with just a single rear muffler, also by Frankie at Not Scared at Racing and Fabrication. I'll throw in some photos of that now. He did a beautiful job. It's really stunning, really well done. It sounds quite aggressive, it's quite loud. We'll see if I'm okay with that over time. I wanted to start pretty loud for a start, just not worry about a resonator in the middle, and then later on I can add in another resonator or change the muffler if I really need to. But yeah, as we'll see on the dyno video soon, it certainly sounds pretty good at 9,000 RPM. Also fitted up the side Lexan windows. These are just held in with a couple of cable ties, they're super lightweight. These here are also Lexan. This is glass just for the moment because I'm changing to a carbon rear trunk, and once I do that I'll put the Lexan rear screen in as well. There'll be a nice weight saving. Inside the car we've now got passenger seat and we've got harnesses all around. My co-driver Adrian Burney popped over the other night and we got all those set up and adjusted for the proper lengths and angles. So the interior is fully ready to go. I also added a bunch of little grommets and plugs to try and seal up the interior from all the holes of the stuff that I've removed along the way. No doubt a little bit of water will still get in if it's a wet event, but not too much. Also put in some SFI rated roll cage padding, which is a requirement here in Australia, anywhere that your head can touch. So I've got 2 pieces just along the side and along the V up the top. We have quite good clearance for our helmets anyway. These seats are nice and low, so everything's pretty good in the interior. I am waiting for some foot boxes, so there'll be a carbon fibre navigator's footrest which kind of boxes in the footwell, and the driver's just a flat plate that goes under the pedals. Once those arrive, that'll clean this up a bit and stop people's legs being able to touch all my electronics, which is good. And lastly, just in the engine bay, had a cold air intake made up that just shoots down into the guard, and the pod filter is right behind the front bumper, right under the headlight. That's also Frankie at Not Scared. He's done a really fantastic job of that. You'll also see some little orange marks on all the bolts. That's called check seal. Quite similar concept to just paint marking bolts, but it's a little sort of goo that hardens. It's a lot easier to tell if the bolt has actually rotated or the nut is rotated on the bolt. So I've got that everywhere critical, so it's all on the suspension, all on the brakes, underneath the car. And as at a glance between events when I'm doing my maintenance, I can just sort of see where everything's at. So yeah, really stoked with how everything's turned out. It's been a heap of hard work to get to this point, but We're now ready to test, but before we do that, we'll jump across and talk about the dyno. So the dyno session actually went really well, a lot better than I expected. As I've mentioned in the previous videos, this is my first time trying anything like this, and especially the wiring side is very complex and took a long time to do, and everything pretty much worked perfectly, so super happy. Went to Wanted Motorsport here in Perth and tuned by Mick as the contract tuner there, so chucked it on a mainline hub dyno, and they spun that up. The only issue they did have is I'd set up the clutch switch backwards in the ECU, so the car thought it was in launch control the whole time. Super simple fix. Once I got rid of that, I could start mapping it. We did a full flex fuel tune, so 98 and right the way through to E85. And power was better than I expected actually, so really healthy for what's just a stock K20 with a set of Toda cams in it. Toda Spec C cams, Kelford valve springs and Kelford titanium retainers. So we revved it out to about 9,000. That's about as far as I'm comfortable going with the stock oil pump. It's probably pushing it a wee bit, but whatever. And it was still making power at 9,000, so both runs on 98 and E85. Peak power was right at the top of that rev range, so it does pull really cleanly, heaps of mid-range, the torque curve is super flat, and that's what I love about these particular Toda cams, is that they have quite a large non-VTEC lobe. So instead of sort of being, you know, nothing down low, just a regular economy sort of cam lobe and then switch onto a big VTEC, it's actually a much smoother transition. You barely see, you can't even see the transition in the dyno charts, but you do hear it in the intake noise, which you'll hear in the video. So I'll just check up the first dyno chart, which is 98 fuel, so 218 horsepower at the hubs. Again, really stoked with that. Very healthy numbers. Power to weight based on that, it's actually pretty similar to my old Evo 7, which was like 350 horsepower at the wheels. This is how light these things are. And yeah, as I said, it revs to the moon and still making power up top. Jumping across to E85, with the pump E85 that we got here in Perth, it was about 79% ethanol, was about the best that they got to. That added, I think, about 10 horsepower and 20 odd newton meters of torque, which is a big jump in torque. Pretty happy with that. So we ended up with, I think, 232 horsepower at the hubs. And yeah, torque's really healthy too. So very happy with those results. Took it for a quick squirt down the streets right after the dyno. Car's actually too cold. The radiator works too well, so I need to, basically if you're driving around, the running temperature will be like below the engine protection to say that you haven't warmed up yet. So I need to play around with that and potentially block off some of the radiator. But yeah, so I'll chuck on just a quick dyno video now. Yeah, sounds really good, and we'll hear that. So now it's time to get out, get a wheel alignment and get testing. We'll catch up with you again at the racetrack. Hello and welcome from the track. We're up here at Wanneroo Raceway, now known as carco.com.au Raceway, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we'll go with Wanneroo. Just had the wheel alignment done this morning and got a fresh set of Advan A50s mounted on the front there. There's some softs, so I've got softs all round, which is perfect for rally sprints. But too soft for the circuit, but fine enough to do testing that we're doing today. Got up here quite early, a couple of hours before my allotted time, so just been setting things up, checking it over, getting the data screen set up, ready to check temperatures, etc. when I come in for the first session. Plan will be to go out and just bed in the brakes in the first session, get everything up to temp, just sort of drive around a few relatively easy laps, come in, let the brakes cool off, go out and then just progressively start going a wee bit harder, sort of, 60-70% for a few laps in a session, come in, check everything, go out 80%, repeat, and hopefully have a crack at some launches as well, just to see how it gets off the line. I've set the launch control RPM to 4500, we'll see how that goes, I can adjust it up or down. And also this morning, just after the alignment, I stopped in at Wanted Motorsport with Quang, and we had Heltic on the phone just refining how we'd set up the auto blip and flat shift. So if I get time, I've only got the track for an hour, so it's pretty quick. I'll check those settings and see if they need to be adjusted as well. Beautiful day here today. It's about 26 degrees and good breeze. A bit too sunny. It's the wrong time of day to be setting PBs, but I'm not here to set a PB. I'm here to shake the thing down and see how it goes at full race temperatures, so perfect for that. I'll have the GoPro on in the sessions, and I'll try and do a bit of commentary after each session and see how we go. Alrighty, so we're all back home now. What I'll do, I took GoPro footage of the sessions that I had out on track, so I'll intersperse that through this and I'll just talk through what went on. So first time went out, first session was just to bed in the brakes. So I did that. I found I had way too much rear brake bias and it was locking up, but that's fine. That got them all set up pretty good. There's sort of 3 or 4 very medium laps just cruising around. Everything seemed to be fine. Temperatures were holding good. So came in, let the brakes rest for a bit, checked over for leaks. There's nothing, it's all looking good. Tyres are fine. Everything was fine. Just let those brakes rest for a while. Checked over the data from the engine, was all good. So we'll just chuck in that session now. It'll just be like a very quick amount of me just fanging down the straights and getting on the brakes. Next session is session 2. This one went a fair bit better, so went out and started to put some pace into the car. Just cruised around, like not pushing too hard, let's call it 80%. I ended up with a 1:08 lap time, which is pretty good for just cruising. It sort of definitely was not pushing in the corners and definitely not pushing in the braking zones. Target for this car is like a 1:03, so to be out for the first time doing sort of 5 seconds off or just tootling around it is pretty good. So we'll chuck in some footage of this now. I've also got some external footage thanks to Ronan, who was down on the day, so I'll chuck that on afterwards too for a couple of flybys. It sounds pretty wild. and third session. So third session didn't go so well. So after I came in after the last one, just sort of let it rest for a bit, checked over some things. All felt good. Got down into pit lane and it was just a bit sort of missy. Headed out to try and do the lap, and the car was just missing straight away under load. So tilted around for the rest of that lap, came in and free revved it, and it seemed it was completely fine. So went out for another attempt and it was just missing straight away. So came back in, a bit disappointing, and then came up, tried to diagnose it. By the time I got back to the pits, it was just running on 3 cylinders. So I called it a day there. Pretty happy overall. I'd give it like a 5 out of 10 for I guess success of the test day. Car handled great, sort of brakes work well, shocks work well, tyres work well, as to be expected. It's a pretty proven recipe for what I'm doing here. Just got to iron out little bits, with the engine, get that all humming along, and get ready for the next event. So next week. Okay, so the car's up on stands, and I've pulled out the fuel system. First thing I actually did was compression test the engine. That was all good. They're perfectly even within like 1 psi across all 4 cylinders, so that's really good. One thing that I was worried about with it lean misfiring is potentially burning a hole in a piston or compromising something in the engine. So far so good. We'll see how it holds up. So fuel system's completely out, just blocked off the injector holes with some rags at the moment. Pulled it all to bits. Been quite interesting having a look at things, so I'll do my best to show you. So first is the lift pump filter sock. That's actually relatively clean. I imagine it's a fairly coarse sock and it's not really going to pick up much. But yeah, that hasn't really discoloured at all. If we look over at the filter sock on the tank, the pump from the surge tank, that's a lot more crappy. So that used to be white. That's now sort of stained, and you can see there's a whole bunch of crap around the pickup just in there. Moving on to the fuel filter itself. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but it's pretty well clogged up with sort of like a thin film of shit. Pretty much all the way around it, which was as expected. And if we look in the surge tank, there's a lot of sort of milkiness. You can see over the side there's a bunch of sort of residue on the wall there. So quite a lot of dirt and crap inside that. We'll move over to the fuel tank itself, and we can see where all that sludge came from. So again, absolutely no idea if you can see this. There's a whole bunch of little, I'll try and move them around. Basically just the inner lining of the tank has completely failed and come off, and that's will be caused by the E85 because ethanol is such a good solvent. But there's a lot of crap in there. And if we hopefully get some light into the fuel tank pickup bowl, you can see there's a heap of crap built up in there. And looking elsewhere through the tank, yeah, there's just sort of stuff everywhere, and I can sort of see on some of the walls where the lining has come off. So pretty confident that's what our issue is. As essentially the fuel tank line is disintegrating, as well as just like, rust and whatever other shit's in the fuel tank. Like you look at the sender, that's a bit crappy too, so I'll clean that up. But all that's making its way through the fuel system, getting through the fuel filter, which is quite interesting. It's like a 10 micron filter, and finding its way into the injectors, and because the tolerances in the injectors are so fine, it just clogs up super quick. So next job is basically to flush out and clean all of these, or just use sort of degreaser and some terps or something like that to get rid of all the crap out of them. I have a new fuel filter. I didn't want to reuse this one. I'll get the injectors professionally cleaned and flow tested, and with the fuel tank outside, I'll drop that off at a specialist place to get that properly chemically cleaned inside and relined with an epoxy that's E85 safe. So that's it for this update. I'll carry on with this now, and I've probably got a few other jobs, so I may catch up later on, but otherwise next time I see you we'll be reassembling the fuel system. Okay, it's a couple of weeks later. We've sent away the fuel tank and the injectors to get cleaned. That's all come back, which is good. So fuel tank is looking fantastic. This was done by Perth Radiators. A lot of money for it, but less money than buying a new tank and shipping it in from America, which is exorbitant freight costs. So clearly they've cleaned and painted the outside, so it looks super nice. And on the inside you can see there's a red epoxy coating in there, so that's an E85 safe liner. So they've chemically stripped all the old liner, given whatever bath it needs to have, and then yeah, surrounded the insides of it with a proper E85 safe epoxy, which is good. So that's all ready to go back in. Got the rest of the fuel system components just sitting over there, ready to go. I've got new socks for both pumps, and I've got a new fuel filter as well. And I also had the injectors cleaned and flow tested. I'll put up some images of the before and after of those. One in particular was like 25% down, which is about the same as what happened last time. So clearly that's the reason for the car leaning out and then eventually missing. So that was done by Janad at 80S Automotive here in Perth. He's got a fantastic rig. It's like a proper Motec ECU that runs his injector cleaning and flow testing in it. It's a really good setup. So he's the best, and he does a really fantastic job. It helps that he's about 3 minutes down the road from me as well. So what I'll do now is I'll reinstall the fuel system in the car. All the lines, including the lines underneath the car, are flushed. I've got a little bit of E85 here, so I've just run them through the lines again just now to just double check and pushed it out with air. So yeah, we'll get the tank in, we'll get all the fuel lines and surge tank and injectors into the engine bay, and then we'll have a crack at starting it up. Alrighty, so fuel tank and fuel system is all back in, pretty straightforwards. Everything popped in pretty nicely. So what I need to do now is prime the fuel system and check for leaks. So there's two stages to this. First stage is I need to fill the surge tank up, because otherwise if I turn both pumps on, you know, with the fuel pump button on the keypad, the main pump will run dry for ages, and that's not very good for it. So I'll show you how we do that in the Haltech software. On the laptop I've got the fuel pump section set up, and all I've done is the main fuel pump output. So I've got like a lift pump and a main pump. I've removed the PDM assignment for that, so that essentially that main pump in the surge tank doesn't run. So what I'll do now is I'll manually turn on the fuel pumps off the keypad in the car, and we'll let that surge tank fill up. So let's go and do that. So I can hear that the lift pump is now running, and we'll get you in close and hopefully you can hear that surge tank filling up. So what I'm doing is I'm basically just waiting for it to fill, and then I feel it go down the return line, which is the second line here. And once I feel some fuel coming through it, then I can go and turn that pump off, and I know the surge tank is full. It does take quite a while. The lift pump is quite small on this. Cool, I can feel that coming out that line now. So that fuel pump's now off. Now what I want to do to prime the whole system and check is, back in the Haltech, I'm going to reassign that main fuel pump. And I'm going to reset the prime time back to 3 seconds. So that means that the system, once I key on the ignition, will run for 3 seconds. And that will pressurize everything up, but I'll also turn the pumps on manually just to check everything through. So I'll reset the ECU from here, and that will prime it up. Actually, it would. Except I probably want to plug in the power. Give me a second, I'll do that. Take 2, I have actually plugged the power back into the pump, which would help. Did mean everything I did on the laptop was completely redundant, but whatever, it still showed you the process of how I would normally do it. So now let's try that again. I'll just reset the ECU from the computer. So we'll prime the fuel system and hopefully you'll hear both pumps. Again, it would if I had the isolator on. Cool, so you can hear both of those quite loud now. What I'll do is just turn the pumps on manually and then we'll have a look around for leaks. Cool, that seemed to work perfectly. That's what I love about AN fittings is once they're done up and they're snug, they're generally very well sealing. Yeah, fuel system's primed, there's no leaks, everything's ready to go. What I'll try and do now is start up the car, I guess. Alright, let me check a few things on the laptop and I'll jump back in before we start it. Okay, just made sure all the right bits and pieces were on in the ECU before I do this. So just make sure, not in gear. Cool, that worked perfectly. On the laptop screen I was just looking at all the vital signs, so oil pressure, oil temperature, coolant pressure, that sort of thing. Everything was where it needs to be, so pretty happy with that. Yeah, fuel system's sorted, hopefully. We do need to do a test day to put it under some pressure to get that sorted out, but that won't be for a few weeks' time. If you managed to make it this long in the video, congratulations. That was a bloody long one, so you've done well. Like I said at the start, I'd like to sort of talk through how the car's gone over the last year of competition, what's gone wrong, what's gone right, what I've changed since the last build videos, and what the plans are for the future. So first up, we'll talk about reliability. So you would have seen the car, when testing, had a few issues with the fuel system. The injectors were getting clogged up with gunk from the fuel tank, but that was a pretty easy fix. Outside of that, the car's been fantastic. Very, very little has gone wrong with it, almost nothing. The only sort of race-ending thing that ever happened which fortuitously happened after a race event, was the coolant swill pot down there. Due to the vibrations of the engine, that cracked on one of the lines. Pretty minor, although it was a bit of a pain to get that welded up because all the aluminium had been contaminated by the coolant in the system. But we added a gusset to it. You can see the support down there, and that's been fine ever since. And the other weird thing that happened pretty much at the same event was the oil cap snapped off. So I had the factory plastic oil cap on there and used to probably tighten it too much. And basically it just snapped and shot a bunch of oil through the engine bay. Pretty easy to clean up, no real issue. Everything else has been sweet. It's all going well. Touch wood, I compression tested it the other week and it still got just as much compression as it had when I first installed the engine, and it's still just as fast down on the straights. In terms of competition results, it's been a pretty solid year of development for the car. So I've been through a couple of different suspension iterations, just trying to get the coilovers to handle the way that I want them to with my style of driving. Shockworks has been super helpful for that, and we've got it to the point now where the car just drives like a dream. It's super predictable, really stable, and super fast around corners. So the main series that I compete in is the WA Speed Event Series here in Western Australia. And for the under 2 litre class, I compete in like the open under 2 litre class. I won almost every race I entered. I think one of them I came second, and that was by a couple of tenths of a second. So that was great. The car is quick, and that also put me a long way towards my sort of ultimate goals with the car of being the fastest under 2 litre car in WA's sort of history. So in terms of lap records, what I'd aimed for this car, I wanted to do a 1:03 lap time at our local track, Wanneroo Raceway, and I wanted to do sort of like a 1:16 lap time at Collie, which is the other major track that we have here in Western Australia. I've done both of those things. I've done a 1:03.8 at Wanneroo and a 1:16.7 at Collie in the long track. So really happy. It's been a great year, really enjoyed it. I'll put in some footage of those laps after I finish speaking. In terms of the records, the Wanneroo record for an under 2 litre is a 1:01.9 as far as I can tell. So that's pretty quick. I've got a long way to go to get down to that point. But for Collie, I've already nabbed that record, so pretty happy. So moving on for 2025, what I'm looking to do to make the car even faster is one, just keep driving it and keep getting used to it, pushing it and pushing myself. But two, be a couple of minor changes. So you can already see I've added a wing to the car. That added a bit of rear end stability, and that's been quite helpful. What it also needs is a front splitter. So I'll be doing a front splitter at some point this year, and that'll be quite a large front splitter with some diffuser tunnels that vent into the wheel wells. I'll also do bonnet venting and guard venting to try and get as much front downforce as possible. That'll probably mean I need to upgrade the rear wing to something a bit bigger. That's fine. We'll just make sure the aero balance works the way we need it to. And the second area of development will be tyres. So currently I'm on an R-Comp semi-slick, the Advan AO50, and I'm looking to move to full slicks this year, probably trying some Hankook F200, I think they are, slicks. What that does is it lets me keep running 17-inch wheels, so I can keep my giant brakes, but I can run a smaller diameter tyre, which lets me run the car lower to the ground and more within the car's ideal suspension geometry windows. These cars are designed to run 15-inch wheels, so when you put 17s on with the bigger tyres, the tyre diameter of a 17-inch, like a 255 17 like I have here, is probably like 50 millimeters or 2 inches taller than a 15-inch wheel. So you have to run the car at a really high ride height in order to make that work properly, because otherwise the tyre contacts the body and it's a whole bunch of not much fun. I could get the car tubbed. That's a lot of fabrication, so I'd probably like to avoid that at this point in time. So moving to the smaller diameter 17-inch slicks will be 2 birds, 1 stone. It'll be grippier tyres and they'll be shorter diameter, so I can get the car lower, make the aero work better and make the suspension work better. So I'm looking forward to 2025. It's going to be a fun year of racing. I'll continue to post up probably just short videos of in-car footage from each of those events. And yeah, we'll just keep loving it. At the start of this build, my ultimate goal was probably to supercharge the car and make it go really fast. Definitely having second thoughts about that now. It's so good as a naturally aspirated car. You can just thrash the hell out of it. It's so much fun, and it's still really fast. So pretty happy. We'll see what happens, how I feel towards the end of the year. Maybe I'll change my mind and want to go back to forced induction on this, or maybe I'll start building something different entirely. Who knows? But yeah. Thanks for watching. Again, that was a super long one, so great job if you stuck around. But yeah, let's put on those 2 fastest laps from this year, and that'll close us out. Thank you.